Welcome to my compilation video of every cut, change and addition that was made to the second cour of Bleach's 1000 Year Blood War arc anime adaptation. Cour 2 featured several new anime exclusive scenes like the Bankai reveal of Shinji and Senjumaru, as well as anime only fight sequences which expanded the role of the Bambis in the story, and not to forget the insane anime only post credit scenes where Ichigo is traveling through Irazusando. This video compiles together all of my manga vs anime comparisons for the second cour of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Hopefully via this video you'll better understand how the anime is adapting the manga through all of the different cuts, changes and additions that are being made. So without further delay, let's dive into the second cour of the new Bleach anime. It's been quite a long and painful 6 months of waiting, but we are finally back with Bleach Saturdays. The Bleach anime director Tomohisa Taguchi and his team have promised that we're going to be getting a different experience from cour 2 onwards. So I'm excited to see how this new experience translates into the adaptation of cour 2 of Bleach's 1000 Year Blood War arc. The 14th episode of the new Bleach anime is titled The Last 9 Days, and it continues with where the post-credit scene of episode 13 had left off, with Uryu appearing before Yhwach. The pacing of this episode is in line with what we have expected from cour 1, as episode 14 adapts material from chapters 543 to 546. Now these 4 chapters were very dialogue heavy and they were void of any action sequences. Now if you know, chapters with a lot of action are easy to fly through when they are adapted into anime form. However, I was very interested to see how the first episode of cour 2 would handle all of the dialogue, and if any of it would be cut or streamlined in order to make room for a few anime exclusive scenes which we do know are present within this first episode. So without further delay, let's dive into my manga versus anime comparison of episode 14 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. If you want to check out my thoughts on the all new opening and ending song for cour 2, then be sure to check out my review that I had posted yesterday. Lastly, I'll try my best to refrain from talking about scenes which are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'm going to solely focus in this video on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. The episode begins with a unique anime exclusive scene, which is an extremely chilling sequence that hints at Yhwach's origin story taken from the manga. Now this scene not only uses masterful visual storytelling, but it explains it so incredibly well. One of the main worries that fans had about this backstory was on how it was going to be adapted into the anime, and if there was going to be a need for a narrator or anything of the sort. But surprisingly, Taguchi and his team have come through once more with this incredible sequence that begins with what resembles a number of sperms coming together to form a cell, then a cluster of cells, and then multiplication continues until a baby is formed. This sequence alone answers a massive question that fans have had about how Yhwach had come to be. Knowing what we know about the Soul King and his sentient body parts, most of us had wondered whether if Yhwach had inherited one of the body parts of the Soul King, but instead we get a straight up confirmation that he was conventionally conceived by the Soul King and his partner, meaning that the Soul King at least was able to sexually reproduce with someone else. Now after the baby forms, he's held by what appears to be his mother. Now this is a person who is shaded in a color that implies that they themselves were also more than just a simple human, but this is just about as wholesome as it gets, because afterwards the sequence evolves into something slightly horrifying, because the mother figure is quickly absorbed into the baby, and as the baby falls, a bunch of dark, eerie looking hands reach out to catch the infant. The scene zooms out to show the sheer number of people who were touching the child, and in an almost uplifting way, all the hands begin to light up until all of them are lit in a manner quite similar to the light that the baby's mother originally had. Now this scene tricks you into believing that hey, maybe things aren't so bad, and then in a manner that I can only describe as pure genius, it instantly cuts to the hands suddenly being drained of a red substance that now begins to flow into the baby. The hands that were once lit up and full of life begin to age and wither as more and more of the red energy is drained from them. The seemingly lifeless hands then begin to chant Yhwach's name, and it totally gives me chills seeing this moment. With the baby now absorbing what appears to be the life of the people touching him, he begins to age and eventually forms as the Yhwach as we know today. I feel like this scene on its own could have been broken down in its own separate video because of just how incredible it is. It manages to capture the essence of Yhwach's origin with zero speech, and it makes it somehow even more terrifying than the manga ever could. Following the opening song, we start with an anime exclusive scene with Ichibei speaking to Ichigo about the damage that the Soul Society had sustained, as he calls the Shinigami pathetic and how 1,000 years of peace have made them weak. Ichigo notes how Squad Zero have done nothing in response to help them, but Ichibei reminds him that it's their job to watch over the Serite, not to get involved with protecting it. But he does make an important distinction here, as he states that it is the Zero Division's duty to train the Shinigami, as he warns Ichigo that the Quincy will be back soon. When Ichigo leaves to head back to the Soul Society, Ichibei tells him that he won't be able to beat Yhwach in his current state. This piece of information is very insightful. It's pretty much the only time where we're given a look at Ichibei's opinions of the current era of Shinigami. It is surprisingly similar to what Yhwach also believes, that the Shinigami have grown weaker over the years of peace. But it seems that Ichibei and Yhwach may hold these beliefs for different reasons. Now, my favorite thing about this interaction is Ichigo's response. Ichigo doesn't take the slander from Ichibei, and he does point out that Squad Zero had done nothing about it to help the Shinigami. But then Ichibei's response in a lot of ways actually reminds me of everything that is wrong with the world of Bleach. The most powerful and skilled Shinigami are all locked away in another dimension, protecting a corpse, while their knowledge and skills could have served for the betterment of reality. As much as Ichibei may have acknowledged the fact that training the Shinigami is a duty of the Zero Division, it is very clear that they barely attend to even that, and in fact they could be blamed for the current weakness within the Soul Society, because of the lack of attention that they have paid towards the Gotei 13. Now this scene gives Ichigo a nice bit of agency, that he is still willing to ask the important questions instead of just swallowing whatever Ichibei tells him here. After this, we begin adapting manga material with the Sternritter meeting, which is taken from the start of chapter 543. This scene is altered within the anime, as it begins with Hashward and Yhwach walking onto the stage, with Hashward telling the subordinates to stand and to salute Yhwach, in comparison to the manga where they were already on stage. Yhwach has a speech here that is extended within the anime, as he first reminds the Quincy that 1,000 years ago they were defeated by the Shinigami. They had lost many comrades, and the very existence of the Quincy was threatened. He goes on to say that the Quincy had only survived by hiding in the shadows, enduring humiliation while they had waited for those 1,000 years to pass. He then states that the final battle will soon commence, saying that the time has come to annihilate the Soul Society and the Shinigami, so that the honor of the Quincy can be reinstated. Now he says that he has an announcement to make, as events begin to follow the start of chapter 543, as Uryu is called onto the stage. Following the announcement that Uryu will be Yhwach's successor, the reactions are better shown within the anime in my opinion, because in the manga we just see reactions from a crowd of Sternritter, but the anime gives some of the reactions to Bambietta and Pepe for example, and we even get to see Meninas say some lines. Now Bazby's outburst here is altered in the anime, because in the manga he yells out in defiance, asking Yhwach to hold on for a second. He even has to be stopped by Hashward, who stops him from saying anything else. In the anime we just have Bazby mutter to himself what is going on, and he thinks to himself Yugo, which is the nickname that he has for Hashward, who is later shown to be looking ominously at Bazby. Now the rest of the sequence plays out very similar to how the events unfold within the manga with no real changes. Now next up we have Bambietta's relief scene and her discussion with the Bambis from chapter 544. All of this is brought forward and it happens immediately following the Sternritter meeting, as Bambietta calls one of her subordinates from the meeting into a room. It then immediately cuts to the subordinate being killed. It is worth noting that Bambietta's exchange with the Bambis is streamlined, because a lot of manga material is condensed down in this scene, because in the manga Bambietta reminds them that they too like to make a lot of messes. Lil Toto the Savage calls her a stupid bitch, stating that cookie crumbs and blood splatter are not the same. Meninas nervously says that she could have done it outside. The hot-headed Candice complains about how she keeps killing hot guys whenever she pleases, which is then followed by the witty Giselle asking Candice if she likes picking up hot subordinates too. Now when the Bambis start to argue, Bambietta tells them to keep the noise down, as she has a lot on her mind, revealing that she is worried about the future of the Wandenreich, which is in response to Uryu having been appointed as Yhwach's successor. Now this is how things unfold within the manga, but this scene in the anime is cut down and changed considerably, as it has Bambi say that at least she did it in her own room, which is a variation of Meninas's line from the manga. This is so that Candice can respond to Bambietta with her lines from the manga, with her complaining about Bambietta killing hot guys, instead of the entire conversation being made about Bambietta's rather questionable habits. That topic is instead pushed to the side so that we can draw attention to Bazby causing a ruckus outside. Now this is actually a significantly better change that sets up Bambietta's character in a really nice way. She obviously is angry about Yubak's decision to make Uryu his successor, but she channels her anger quite differently than someone like Baz B, who would rather spend his time raging about things that he doesn't like. He is overtly angry, while Bambietta does things more covertly. This characterization really convinces me of Kubo's plans to flesh out the Bambis much more than he had done in the manga. In the anime, Candice asks Bambietta why is it that she doesn't just join Baz B, because she must be pretty annoyed too, but Bambietta says that she's not really because it's stupid. Now this is Bambietta's roundabout way of showing that she is annoyed with her mixed signals. The anime then cuts back to material from chapter 543 with Baz B reacting to the news in front of the Sternritter. In the manga, he appears to be with BG9, Mask and Kangdu, but in the anime he is with all of the Sternritter. When he expresses his opinion on Uryu, the dialogue incidentally is reworked so that a few more Sternritter are able to give their input on the matter. Lil Toto has an anime only line as she asks Baz B what is there to explain, because this is the first time that any of them are hearing about a successor. Meninas also has an anime only line where she wonders if Yubak doesn't have long to live. Giselle is then seen to tease Candice by saying that she should make a move on Uryu, but Candice yells that she doesn't belong to the streets and that she isn't that easy to win over. The Bambis are in fact given a lot more love in cour too, as we get a real solid look at the dynamic that they have as a friendship group. It's actually really awesome seeing all of them just sitting around and talking about their uncertainties, because we're left with a rather nice group dynamic that has formed between these girls. Now Baz B leaving to speak to Yubak has been modified in the anime. In the anime, some scenes are cut, like Baz B pushing aside one of his aides, with Mask asking where he is going and Baz B explaining that he is going to speak to Yubak. Mask insists that he stops in the manga, saying that Yubak will not tolerate his insubordination. He is then interrupted by Hashward, who stops him from going further. But in the anime, things are different, as he storms out of the room, but he is blocked from leaving by Hashward. We skip the scenes of the aide being pushed over and Mask protesting. Also, this way, the anime has their argument occur in front of all of the Sternritter, as opposed to in front of the spying Pepe and Askin, who later appears. Now, the anime incidentally removes all mentions of Pepe spying on their argument. Following this, we have some changes that were made to Uryu's initiation ritual, where he acquires his own shrift. In the manga, he drinks his blood first and he learns that he will be bestowed with the letter A as his shrift. This is before he goes on to ask why is he his successor. In the anime, this scene is changed as Uryu asks why is he his successor before he drinks the blood. Now this makes a lot more sense in my opinion, because he isn't fully convinced at this point, and hearing the reasoning from Yubak helps to give Uryu a convincing reason to complete the ritual, instead of having questions after the ritual is complete. Him asking why he is the successor is taken from the start of chapter 544, and it is reworked into his initiation scene from chapter 543. In addition to this reworked scene, there are also lines cut where Uryu comments on how him being appointed as the successor will cause friction amongst the Sternritter. Now this is strange because another scene from the same chapter linking back to Uryu's comment here is also cut, and it's between Hashward and his personal aide. I guess I'll quickly talk about it here, since the sequence of events have been chopped around and changed so much between chapters 543 and 544. Now this scene involving Hashward and his aide occurs when we see Hashward returning to his quarters, and his aide speaks to him about Yubak's recent announcement. She makes a suggestion to him saying that Yubak may need some advice regarding the decision that he has just made. Hashward explains that this is their majesty's wish, because he is aware that naming Uryu as his successor will cause upset within the Sternritter, and Yubak is aware of this. Even Uryu had pointed this out to Yubak earlier, but Hashward theorizes that this was done purposefully, so that the anger of the Sternritter will be directed towards Uryu, the new recruit, regardless of who he is or what power he may come to possess, and whatever his true intentions may be, it will be difficult for him to now make any move now that everybody has their eye on him. He is left with no choice but to dedicate himself to Yubak and to follow his will. Now this is even if Uryu has realized the real reasoning behind why Yubak had baited him out in the open by making him his successor. So all of these mentions of the reasoning behind Yubak's decision to make Uryu his successor are all removed from the anime, notably omitting Hashward's scene, which was the first hint in the story that Yubak and Hashward were distrustful of Uryu, and that set him up by making this announcement. So it seems like Kubo is playing the long haul when it comes to Uryu's betrayal, and he doesn't want to drop any hints when it comes to the manga. Coming back to Uryu and Yubak's conversation during the ritual, their conversation continues with excerpts taken from chapter 544, along with some anime-only only additions to their conversation. The first is this anime only scene which is added of Uryu visiting his mother's grave. The grave appears to be the site of a mass burial, which leads me to deduce that this is where the victims of Ashwaunen were buried, because there were so many people that had died that there wasn't enough time to make proper graves for each of them. In the anime, Yhwach and Uryu's conversation is extended here, as Yhwach states that there was a reason why he had survived Ashwaunen. Uryu then says that ever since the day that he had lost his mother, he had been wondering why is it that his mother had died and he had survived. He questions his purpose. Uryu reveals that the answer was written within the journal of Soken Ishida. Now I can't stress how much that this change had excited me, because this goes all the way back to an answer that Kubo had given on Club Outside. He was asked why is it that Uryu had survived Ashwaunen, and then had responded that due to how complex this explanation is, he's going to try and see if he can include it within the upcoming anime. And this scene between Uryu and Yhwach 100% confirms that Kubo's venture was successful, and that he was able to add all the extended lore on why Uryu survived and what makes him so special. I think that the anime is taking a totally different approach and giving Uryu's betrayal more depth, and rightly so. It is extending his role within an arc that is dedicated to his race. In the added dialogue during this scene, Uryu says that he has confirmed the words of Yhwach to be true, stating that he understands that Quincy and Shinigami can never get along, and he understands who he really is, as we see visuals of him and Ichigo once again emphasizing that Uryu has turned sides, and once again the anime is doing a better job at this betrayal than what was shown within the manga. Uryu says that he has severed his ties from the past in order to bury the Shinigami. Yuha tells him that he will show him his future as Uryu drinks his blood, as we cut back to material from the end of chapter 543. This is where Yhwach tells him that he will receive a shrift with the same letter as him. Because there was a lot of chopping and changing going on here, we get to see an awesome extended sequence of Uryu drinking Yhwach's blood here, which was an excellent addition in my opinion. Now we hit the midpoint of the episode as we cut to a streamlined scene from Hueco Mundo that was adapted from the end of chapter 544. In the anime, we immediately cut to Urahara working on Kilge's medallion, whereas in the manga, this was the last thing that we were shown from this particular scene. In the manga, we catch up with Orihime and the others who are currently training. She appears to have traveled to the Negal ruins on her own as she wonders how Chad is doing. Urahara had a strange flying creature called Pero accompany Orihime to the ruins. It seems as though Chad and Orihime were tasked with getting to the Negal ruins separately, and this was a form of training for them. Chad had already arrived as he greets her, saying that everyone is here, as Orihime wonders who else could be accompanying them. The anime on the other hand changes this entirely, as Orihime is already with Chad at the ruins and Urahara is observing them from the Pero creature. Chad tells her that they should start training as they don't have much time, and we see a strange cloaked figure standing next to them. Now when Orihime says that she wonders what Ichigo is doing, we cut to yet another anime exclusive scene here, and it's Ichigo removing his robe and speaking to Ichibei, continuing the training discussion from the very start of the episode. Ichibei once again tells him that he will not be able to defeat Yhwach in his current state, as he needs to surpass a Shinigami, which Ichigo says that he is okay with doing. Ichibei says that he can hone his Zanbakudo skills as much as he wants to, but he will still remain a Shinigami. Ichigo then picks up a wooden stick as Ichibei says that they will now begin, and the area is then transformed into what Ichibei describes to be a sacred place which you cannot enter without the permission of the Soul King. Ichibei reveals that he will now test him here in order to see if he is worthy of surpassing a Shinigami. In another anime only scene where we see Shunsui speaking to Nanao in front of the Squad 1 barracks, he tells her that he hopes that things are going well for Ichigo, as Nanao questions if he is worried. Shunsui notes that Ichibei is a very cunning man, saying that he has taken Ichigo, but who knows if Ichibei is acting in the best interest of the Serete. Nanao is surprised to hear this, as Shunsui changes the topic and says that they should focus on what they can do here for now. Now, a scene from the very start of chapter 545 is cut from the anime, and it's a catch up with what's going on in Kurosaki Clinic, where we see Yuzu has just made food and she calls out to the others to come and eat. Ishin is busy with the patient and Karin is playing a game. She wonders when Ichigo will be coming back from training camp. We then get this conversation between Hiyori and Shinji, which is rearranged in the anime to appear before Rukia and Renji begin their training with Ichibei, but in the manga it happens after they start their training with Ichibei. Following this, we get some Rukia and Renji scenes from chapter 545, and everything is the same aside from them speaking about reishi density within the royal palace, and some comedic material referencing their visit to Senjumaru's palace, which is cut from the anime. In the manga, Renji notes that they are still not used to the air in the royal palace, palace, since the reishi density of the atmosphere is very high here. Rukia says that it feels like they are underwater, as she wonders what effect this level of reishi density will have on them. Now, the Senjumaru cut content involves Rukia and Renji commenting on the different palaces that Byakuya will be visiting now that he is healed. He will be going to Kiryo's palace to eat next, then training his sword with Nimaya. Following this, he will be taken to Senjumaru's palace as Rukia and Renji were, and they describe it to be a measurement from hell. This is where Senjumaru had told them to remove their clothes so that she could properly take measurements of their proportions for the Shihakusho that she will end up creating for them. Rukia dreads to think about Byakuya going through the same humiliation that they had went through. I guess that this stuff from chapter 545 had to be cut, considering all of the changes and additions that have been made thus far. The rest of the episode adapts Shunsui meeting Ichigo's friends from the end of chapter 545 and continuing on to chapter 546, which appears to be pretty faithful to the manga. This is aside from streamlining this entire scene by cutting some comedic moments involving Keigo's character when he tells Shunsui that he must be joking, after he reveals to them that he is here to talk to them about saying goodbye to Ichigo. During this conversation, when Shunsui says that Ichigo is in a special place, we see some visuals from an earlier anime-only scene of Ichibei training Ichigo. After Shunsui hands them 3 soul tickets, we see that a panel is cut from the anime, where Tatsuki suggests that these tickets should also be given to Ichigo's family too, as Shunsui states that he has already sent some to his family. Now, I am assuming for whatever reason Kubo had this cut from the anime, because I was getting really hyped for a bonus scene of Shunsui speaking to Isshin, which would have been incredible. Now, following this, we get some anime-only scenes while Orihime is giving her speech about everyone working together. We see the cloaked individual again here, and we also quite notably see the Fullbringers Yukio and Riruka appear in front of Urahara's tent. Now, this is some excellent additions that they have made into the manga, and hopefully this means that the Fullbringers will be getting an expanded role within the anime. Now, the episode comes to a close with the Serete being engulfed by the Wandenreich city, and while Yuhobak says the Quincy Emperor song, we get some anime-only scenes of the Sternritter marching out for battle. So what a way to start off the second cour with episode 14, because there was so much more changes and additions to this episode than I was expecting. The pacing, while at 4 chapters, did a great job of cutting down unnecessary scenes that don't align with the direction of the anime, which we fully know now Kubo is spearheading. He wrote the dialogue scripts for cour 2. He is sitting in on the voice recording sessions for the episodes. So when you see any cuts, additions and changes that are made to the sequence of events, then be reassured that they have been overseen by Kubo. Now, I am really looking forward to seeing all of the action kicking off in next week's episode, which is titled Peace from the Shadows. The 15th episode of Bleach's 1000-Year Blood War arc continues with the second invasion of the Quincy. Now, the pacing of this episode is faster than last week as we cover more manga material here, and it is crazy how things from the manga are being rearranged and placed in a more effective manner in comparison to the manga. Episode 15, Peace from Shadows, covers material from chapters 547 to 551 of the manga, adapting 5 chapters worth of manga material into this week's episode. The action finally kicks off as we begin the intense encounters between the Shinigami and the Quincy. There are a few anime-only scenes in this episode, and there are several changes made to the sequence of events in comparison to how they unfold within the manga. In addition to this, there are some cut manga panels and replaced lines of dialogue which are really surprising, and they possibly hint at Kubo intervening with the script for cour 2 and planning to expand upon the story further in cour 3 and cour 4 of the anime. So as always, I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes which are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'm going to solely focus on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. There is a lot to dive into, so without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 15 of the Bleach 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. We begin the episode with an anime original scene of Hashward coordinating a meeting between the Sternritter. Outside of the Schutzstaffel, pretty much everyone is present here. Hashward basically gives them what I can only describe as a murder pep talk, relaying to them the orders that Yuobak has given to them. He reminds the Sternritter that they are to kill the Shinigami with their own Bankai. He also warns them to prepare for the likelihood of the Shinigami learning to fight without their Bankai, and they need to go out of their way to instantly destroy the enemy. This is a scene that essentially gives the audience information that was meant for the later chapters of the manga, which I find really amazing. Since there isn't really a precedent for this scene in particular, aside from the information within it existing in later manga chapters, there's nothing else to really compare it to. But if there is one thing that I'd like to add, it's that once again we're given another scene with the Sternritter interacting with each other, which makes me really happy happy that we see more of these moments with this group of individuals, because a lot of people compared the Sternritter to the Espada and said that the Espada were a lot more fleshed out in comparison to the Sternritter, but now the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime is actually going out of its way adding these additional scenes and giving each of the Sternritter new lines of dialogue. During this meeting scene in particular, we had dialogue lines for Robert Acutron, Asnod, Bambietta, and lastly even BG9. So at the beginning of chapter 547, a lot of stuff is trimmed down, including the first page where we see Ichigo grab his 2 Zanpakuto, signaling that his training is complete. Now this scene in particular is swapped around for a 1-minute exclusive post-credit scene at the end of this episode, which is very fascinating and I'm going to talk about it later on. The remainder of the beginning of the chapter where we see the Serete being replaced by the Quincy City and several Shinigami reacting is all cut from the anime. In particular, several Gote 13 members reacting like Shinji, Rose, Omaida, Momo, Isane, and Iba are also cut from the anime. Within the anime, Ukitake's seated officers informing him about the sudden change while he is in the temple happens first. Now we are then shown the scene where Shunsui states that he had set up traps within the Serete, but he wasn't expecting them to lose their territorial advantage. Now the order in which these two scenes appear in the anime is swapped around in comparison to the manga, where we actually see Shunsui speaking first before we cut to Ukitake's seated officer speaking to him. Roughly 2 chapters involving the research and development department panicking is cut from the anime, and the cut content involves Squad 12 panicking that none of their surveillance devices are working, stating that the Serite is now gone, and then suddenly their entire department ends up being transformed into a room with Quincy flags as they exclaim, "What on earth is going on?" Now this line, "What the hell is happening?" is kept within the anime, but all of the panicking before that is cut. Chapter 547's explanation of the shadows in the Serete is changed slightly to Uryu and Yobak speaking while he is sat down. In the manga instead, he was stood on top of Silburn watching over the landscape as he explains these details to I presume Uryu who is standing with him. In the anime, while Askin is speaking to the research and development department, it is here where he is formally introduced into the story as Sternritter D, which is a lot earlier on in comparison to the manga. Similarly, when Hashward is speaking to Shunsui, he is also introduced as Sternritter B, which again is earlier in comparison to the manga. And another instance of this is Baz B being introduced as Sternritter H, while he is confronting members of Squad 10 that he attacks with his flames. Now the discussion between Baz B and Hitsugaya continues from the end of chapter 547 into chapter 548, where they both introduce themselves to each other and go on to state that they are a good match for each other. This of course is before the scene where Omaida and his younger sister are together, and this change makes sense due to the way that things are left off at the end of chapter 547 and how it clashes with the start of chapter 548. So the anime wraps up the formalities between Hitsugaya and Baz B before we end up cutting to Omaida and his sister. Now what is fascinating is Omaida saying to himself that he is scared repeatedly and why did this have to happen while Soifon is away, and him questioning what he should do is all cut from the anime. This of course is right before his younger sister grabs onto his arm and tells him that she is afraid. Now before we cut to the midpoint of the episode, we get this ominous anime exclusive scene of Yuhobak sitting watching over the battlefield with Uryu beside him. Now this is a really nice addition in my opinion, and it connects what is going on in the different locations within the Vandenreich city, with Yuhobak obviously at Silburn watching the events unfold. After the mid-card of the episode, we cut back to material from chapter 548 following Hitsugaya and Baz B introducing themselves to each other. Now a scene is cut from the anime where the Squad 10 Shinigami pick up a piece of Hitsugaya's ice which had protected them, and they comment on how thin this ice is, and it's a miracle that it had protected them in the first place. They then question whether if Hitsugaya is going to be okay. Before Rangiku turns up and speaks with Hitsugaya, there is a really nice anime exclusive scene here, which we have seen from the earlier trailers of Cour 2, where Baz B fires a flaming fist towards Hitsugaya, who evades the attack by getting onto higher ground. Now this is where Rangiku appears and speaks to him about how they are going to work together now. Now when Rangiku activates his Shikai, the exchange between Baz B and Rangiku is extended within the anime slightly. The anime explains how the ice vacuum forms by combining Rangiku and Hitsugaya's power. Now both Baz B and Rangiku get some additional lines of dialogue here, with Rangiku's explanation of the ice vacuum being a lot more playful within the anime in comparison to the manga, and the anime includes some of her quirky mannerisms which help to bring this explanation of her power to life. Now after Baz B is attacked by Hitsugaya from the end of chapter 548, we see the anime depict this a bit better as we see him trapped within a giant wall of ice. At the start of chapter 549, the Squad 10 Shinigami celebrating that Baz B has been defeated defeated is cut, and their lines are instead given to Rangiku, who says that it looks like the Sternritter can be beaten without the use of Bankai. Following this, we cut to material from the beginning of chapter 551, where we see Hashward speaking with Shunsui and Nanao again, as events are changed around in comparison to the manga, presumably because they wanted to give the BG9 fight some undivided time towards the end of the episode. A panel is also cut from the manga where Hashward is thinking to himself that he can't get in through the barrier, and it's like his power is being deflected or absorbed is all not included in the anime. Instead, we cut to the next panel of Nanao revealing the name of a barrier technique. After Nanao explains how a barrier works, we then cut back to material from chapter 549. This is following Rangiku and Hitsugaya's supposed victory. We see Omaida being attacked by BG9, and the difference here is that he is still accompanied by his sister in comparison to the manga where she isn't with him. The anime here portrays Omaida in a more heroic manner, which is in line with the cut material from earlier where he was thinking repeatedly to himself that he is scared. When BG9 accepts that he has refused for the third time to tell him where Soifon is, he says that he will ask him another way. Now things are changed in comparison to the anime and the manga here. In the anime, he points his tendril towards Omaida's younger sister about to attack her, but Omaida protects her and is instead attacked. In the manga, however, he extends a tendril out from his body and he impales Omaida's younger sister, brutally lifting her up into the air. Now additional dialogue from BG9 is cut after he stabs his sister in the manga. This is when he says that he knows that his other family members are also nearby, and if he refuses to answer him again then he will kill all of them. The manga continues with Omaida activating his Shikai and slamming his Zanpakuto into BG9's face, telling him to let his sister go. But BG9 says that if he removes this tendril then she will lose a large amount of blood and die, and he questions whether if he is okay with that. Omaida is enraged in the manga as he yells out, but his Zanpakuto is impaled by his tendril. Now BG9 then reveals his Reishi minigun, and all of this is cut as we get BG9 revealing his minigun after Omaida is impaled, and after he declares that he will not let the Sternritter lay a single scratch on his sister. Now things continue as normal from here after BG9 fires his Reishi minigun and Soifon intercepts the attack. Soifon and BG9 interacting before she unleashes her perfected Shunko is also trimmed down in the anime. In the manga, she actually gives an example stating that she had perfected a Shunko after a battle with Yoriichi, and until today she has been training to improve it even further. But it appears as though this line in the manga was incorrect because Kubo has actually corrected it here, as he says that her Shunko was not perfected the last time that they had fought, and during the short duration of time between the first invasion and the second invasion, she had in fact perfected it. Now this is quite a significant change, and it shows that Kubo is paying attention to every single line that is being uttered within the anime script. Also, I found it strange that if in fact Soifon had perfected her Shunko after her battle with Yoriichi, why is it only now during the final arc of the series that she is displaying it? So it makes a lot more sense for her to say that her Shunko wasn't perfected during her first battle with BG9. Now after Soifon unleashes her infinite Shunko ability, we cut to material from the start of chapter 550, and we save the rest of the stuff from the end of chapter 549 for later. The beginning of chapter 550 of course is catching back up with Askin while he is speaking to Mairi again. After the Askin and Mairi scene, we cut back to the end of chapter 549 with the change making a lot more sense in my opinion, with each alteration to the sequence of events clearly having been well thought out and ensuring that everything links back together a bit better than it does in comparison to the manga. Bazbi saying to Hitsugaya that they are only just warming up at the end of chapter 549 is continued by adapting the rest of the discussion from chapter 550 instead of cutting off to Soifon again. Now a lot of these changes of scenes within the anime and swapping of the placement of the sequence of events is because of the requirement for each manga chapter to end on a suspenseful cliffhanger. So it makes sense to just do all the Bazbi recovery scenes first and then go over to the BG9 recovery scenes, instead of trying to stitch them together like how the manga has done. Now again, this is just because of the differences between the mediums of a manga chapter in comparison to an anime episode. Squad 10 once again have yet another line cut from the anime because after Bazbi is seen to recover in chapter 550, they express their disbelief because the Sternritter should have been apparently ripped apart by Hitsugaya's ice. Now Bazbi speaking about surviving the Shikai flames of head captain Yamamoto from chapter 550 is replaced in the anime anime with a scene where he states that it is too bad that Hitsugaya doesn't have his Bankai right now because he would have proven to him that he only needs one finger to defeat the ice from his Bankai. In the manga, on the other hand, he reveals to Hitsugaya that all of the Sternritter who were directly attacked and burnt by Head Captain Yamamoto are all still alive, including him. This is because he was able to cancel out the flames of Head Captain Yamamoto's Shikai with his own flames. He then confidently claims that he needs only one finger to defeat him. I guess this is how he conveys how powerful he is to Hitsugaya, which, to be honest, I prefer these lines from the manga for this instance in particular, because this really does help us to scale how powerful Bazz-B is by comparing him to Yamamoto's Shikai flames. Now, I'm not sure why this was altered, but this change I personally wasn't a big fan of, because instead of scaling himself to Yamamoto's Shikai flames, in the anime he scales himself to Hitsugaya's Bankai ice. Now, after Hitsugaya is attacked by Burner Finger 1, we then cut to the Soifon and BG9 material from the end of chapter 549 and the 3 pages of chapter 550, which have been rearranged and placed here. Now, after Soifon is attacked by BG9's projectiles, we cut to chapter 551, as we continue the remainder of the discussion between Hashward, Shunsui and Nanao, who end up seeing BG9's explosion occur, and this seamlessly integrates the two events a lot better in comparison to the manga. And overall, I just love how things are being rearranged and placed together in episode 15. Now, the episode of course ends with Kangdu arriving to steal the finishing blow from Bazz-B, and lastly Mayuri learning that Urahara has figured out a way to recover the stolen Bankai. Now, the most fascinating part of episode 15 in my opinion is easily the post-credit scene. Now we get a really chilling 1-minute scene of Ichigo within whatever secret training temple that Ichibei has placed him within. He seems to be slowly walking down the path in front of him, all the while Ichibei's omniscient eyes watch him, as he appears to be reading a scroll that talks about the details of what Ichigo is going through right now. Now, the lines of text within the scroll are recited by Ichibei. So let's break down verse by verse what Ichibei is saying. He starts by stating, "It begins but does not end." Now this of course refers to the process that Ichigo is currently undergoing, or it's in reference to the never-ending path that Ichigo is walking on within this strange realm that he's been taken to. The next verse names "Wither in the silence in an abyss of rolling clouds." We are aware that Ichibei's powers are linked to the power that he bestows upon others with his names, so it could be linked to the names that he gives to others meaning nothing within this realm, as the names fall into the abyss of clouds. This perfectly ties together to the next verse, "Raindrops fill an empty vessel." Now these rolling clouds end up forming raindrops, which most likely are spiritual pressure, and they fill an empty vessel, which of course is speaking about Ichigo as the empty vessel within the realm. Note how Ichigo is here alone and not with Ichibei. Whatever Ichigo is going through right now is something that he can only do alone apparently. The next verses say, "Those who are unworthy to be a vessel succumb to its weight as it turns to stone." This next verse speaks of what happens when an empty vessel who is unworthy fills up with raindrops and they succumb to the weight of it and they transform into stone, going on to describe the consequences of failing while walking down this road, as the next verse speaks about how the stone breaks apart and turns to gravel, and the pounding rain reduces it to dust. For such a vessel, there is no way out. Following this, we see Ichigo experience some sort of heaviness that he is struggling to deal with as he stumbles. Now this sequence of verses speaks about a failed vessel who turns to stone and then becomes gravel, and the rain continues to pour down upon them and it reduces them to dust or even nothing. For such a failed vessel or candidate, there is no escape. Now this leads me to believe that this process that Ichibei has made Ichigo undertake is one that tests for a replacement Soul King candidate. I'm confident that Ichigo is tested here as a future possible Soul King, and to see if he is worthy of becoming the next vessel of the Soul King. Now the poem continues speaking about the failed vessel, as it states, "For such a vessel there is no way out, but if one does not enter there is no path, and those who are about to perish call it Irazusando." Now the final verse of the poem speaks about the failed candidates who have no escape, who do not know if they are failed or not until they walk down the path that Ichigo is on. Those who are unworthy call this road Irazusando. The poem in the end implies that whatever space that Ichigo is currently in is called Irazusando. Now we learn what Irazusando means in this translation, where Irazu means no entry and Sando means a road approaching a shrine. Put together, Irazusando translates roughly to no entry to the road of the shrine. This name implies that it is a road that isn't meant to be found, yet it is a road that leads to to a specific point, which is the shrine. It's a strange contradiction that is present even in the poem. This contradiction perfectly represents what its words say, that it is a path that very few can continue walking on, and for most, this is a path that would have no end. It embodies both the terrible consequences of failing to walk down its infinite corridor, and at the same time acknowledges that there are some who can actually walk it. I'm speculating that Ichibei here is testing to see if Ichigo is worthy to become the next empty vessel, or in other words, the next Soul King. If Yhwach and the Quincy are to kill the existing Soul King, then that would mean that Ichigo would be a fitting replacement. Now this of course is just my interpretation of Ichibei's poem here, and I'd love to hear what all of you think about it too. That was yet again another incredible episode with a lot of changes, cuts and additions made in comparison to the manga. The pacing of the 5 chapters that were covered in episode 15 were handled with a great deal of care. Scenes were chopped and changed around in order to streamline certain moments. Now the events within the manga which were segmented were brought together in the anime in order to improve the overall flow of the story, and in general I loved how episode 15 adapted this week's batch of chapters. The notable change that I was upset about was Baz B's comments on surviving Yamamoto's Shikai flames, but I know Sternritter H will have a lot of additional scenes in Core 3 and 4, so hopefully they make up for some of the omissions that we have had here. The highlight of this episode has to be the 3 anime exclusive sequences, which were the Sternritter meeting at the start of the episode, Omaida rescuing his sister, and of course the post-credit scene with Ichigo and Ichibei. I am really looking forward to seeing more of these additional anime scenes involving Ichigo, and I hope that we get more of an explanation as to what Irazu Sando is. Next week's episode is titled The Fundamental Virulence, and unlike the first 2 episodes which were pre-screened in Japan before release, we don't really know how many chapters will be adapted into episode 16. Episode 16 continues with a brutal invasion of the Quincy, with the Serete being replaced by their frozen city, and the situation goes from bad to worse, with episode 15 ending with the supposed defeat of Hitsugaya and Soifon. I did say it in my review and I'll say it again, this is most likely the most important episode of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Episode 16 roughly adapts 3 chapters worth of manga material, spanning the length of chapters 552 to 554. This gives it a lot of room for anime exclusive content, with other episodes typically adapting 5 chapters of manga material on average. So you could say that we have 2 chapters worth of added scenes in this episode alone. We know that chapters 552 to 554 showcase the Soul Society's comeback, meaning that episode 16 is probably the final setup episode of this core before we start going full throttle into the madness of this season with back-to-back fights involving some of your most favorite characters. But I'm going to talk about that in the weeks to come. Episode 16 adapts the least amount of chapters in the entire adaptation so far, so once again you can expect to look forward to a lot of anime only material, including another post-credit scene involving Ichigo which you absolutely do not want to miss my analysis on. So stick around until the end of the video where I'll be breaking it down in great detail. So as always, I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes which are one-to-one adaptations from the manga, and I'm going to solely focus on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. There is a lot to dive into, so without further delay, here is my manga vs anime comparison for episode 16 of the Bleach 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. The episode begins with an anime exclusive scene of the Soldat battling the Shinigami. We see Iba struggling along with Momo, and one of the Soldat is about to attack Momo as we cut to Isane healing a fallen Shinigami. It's little moments like this that make me appreciate the anime so much. These small additions that have been made of these side characters who weren't really the center focus of these manga chapters that are being adapted into these episodes help to give the entire setting a lot more depth and realism. The second Quincy invasion really does feel fleshed out by including all of these additions. It makes it feel like a lot more of a war as we watch our heroes struggling with the imminent threat of the invading army. Also, on a plus note, it's also really hyped for the Soldat if I'm being honest. In the manga, they are barely ever depicted as a threat, and the only real danger from Yhwach's army being from the Sternritter, but here in the anime they're almost boogeyman tier threats, with even characters of lieutenant class struggling to keep up with them. This further supports the content from episode 7 where we see a troop of Soldat basically go on a rampage and murder the Shinigami. The Soldat are themselves considered to be lieutenant tier threats, which raises the stakes in a brand new way. This scene also helps make another anime original scene all the more believable, which is the scene involving Shinji's Bankai reveal, which I'm definitely going to be talking talking about later on in this video. But let's be real, the real reason that this anime exclusive scene had rocked so hard was because we got a few seconds of Isane on the battlefield. Now that alone makes this episode an easy 11 out of 10. Following this, we are shown a brief reminder from last week's episode where Hitsugaya is attacked by Burnerfinger 2 as he falls to the ground. I personally didn't care much for this slight recap because I don't think that it serves much of a purpose outside of being a reminder that the anime original scenes were being unfolded all at the same time while Hitsugaya was being taken out by Baz B. The anime only material continues as we see Hisagi being chased by a few soldat, and elsewhere we see Ikkaku and Yumichika also running away. Now this additional scene serves a similar purpose to the anime exclusive scene at the start of the episode, as it just helps to flesh out the entire second Quincy invasion, familiarizing ourselves with what was going on at the same time as these huge encounters between Hitsugaya and Baz B, as well as Omaida and Soifon's battle against BG9. All of this stuff wasn't included within the manga, and it's just great to see it within the anime. We then cut back to Kangdo's exchange with Baz B from the start of chapter 552, where Kangdo reminds him of Yuhobak's order to kill the captains with their bankai. We then cut to material from the end of chapter 551, reminding us of Urahara's call to Mayuri, when he tells him that he has figured out a way to regain the stolen bankai, with the episode title card The Fundamental Virulence then appearing on screen before the intro song starts. After the intro, we continue with material from chapter 552 with Mayuri questioning what Urahara has just said. This is pretty much one-to-one adapted from the manga after Urahara asks him to use his lab, much to Mayuri's annoyance. We do get an anime-only line here from Akon who says Captain. Now this addition makes it seem like Mayuri's squad wouldn't mind working with Urahara, which we all know Mayuri is totally against. So yeah, even though it's just one line, it helps to set the tone of the atmosphere of this particular scene. When Akon orders his subordinates to release the Kaizochu insects, we actually see them within the anime, which is a really nice addition. In comparison to the manga, I believe that the anime does a better job here of explaining how the Shinigami have set up a form of communication under these extreme circumstances. This is so that they can contact the captains and lieutenants who are presently on the battlefield. Now I have to admit, I really love how Mayuri's sunsuit looks in the anime with this multicolor effect flowing down his body. It is really insane how nice it looks. Urahara has an additional line in the anime where he references Kilge Oppi and how he was able to absorb Hollow Reishi with his Holy Slave ability. Now this power had absorbed Hollow Reishi, resulting in him exhibiting hollow characteristics onto his body. It ended up greatly deforming him, which demonstrated that the Hollow Reishi was impure for him to take in. This is a great addition in my opinion, as people always cite this example for when they try to contradict that hollows are poisonous to Quincy. Incidentally, Kubo had addressed this issue by having these lines inserted into this anime only scene. While Urahara is speaking to the captains and lieutenants, we get some amazing visuals of the Wandenreich city as his voice is relayed across the battlefield. The anime once again excels here by visually conveying to us what is going on and making us understand the scale of the environment and all of the different parties involved with the second Quincy invasion. We get some anime only scenes during Urahara's explanation where Hisagi along with Yumichika and Ikkaku notice the shadow infiltration pills next to them. Now a panel is cut from the anime where Kangdo responds to Hitsugaya touching the pill. Instead we cut straight to Mayuri speaking about the hostility that Quincy have for hollows. Now this panel of Kangdo reacting to Hitsugaya's bankai being restored is shown towards the end of Urahara's explanation about how hollowifying bankai makes it poisonous to the Quincy. When Kangdo realizes that Hitsugaya's bankai is returning to him, a few lines are cut from the anime. In the manga, he speaks about how there are no irregularities with his medallion, so then why is his bankai returning to him? The anime on the other hand just has Kangdo ask what he has done. After BG9 is defeated by Soifon, we cut to Kangdo, but the anime removes a panel from the manga, and it is of Kangdo telling Hitsugaya not to belittle the Sternritter, asking if he had really thought that they didn't train to control the stolen bankai that they had acquired. This line is omitted as the anime just cuts to the next scene of Kangdo firing a blast of ice towards Hitsugaya. After Kangdo kicks Hitsugaya up into the air, we get a brief anime only shot of the Sternritter being affected by the holification of Daiguren Hyorinmaru. Now the first 3 pages of chapter 554 where Baz B reacts to Kangdo being defeated and Hitsugaya collapsing to the ground are adapted right until we hit the mid card of the episode. Now this means that we have 13.5 pages left to adapt into the second half of the episode. Now let me tell you, these pages are not very dialogue heavy, which means that the second half of the episode has a generous amount of anime-only scenes. After Uryu informs Yhwach that the Bankai have returned to the Shinigami, 3 manga panels are cut from the anime, where Uryu confirms that Yhwach had suspected that they would regain their Bankai eventually. Following Uryu and Yhwach's scene, instead of cutting to Bambietta complaining, we have an anime-exclusive scene of Shinji confronting a large group of soldat. He tells them now they have gone and done it, as he hints at the tide of battle turning, stating that their large size will be their undoing. In an absolutely incredible sequence, with this amazing soundtrack playing, Shinji activates his Bankai, Sakashima Yokoshima, a power that transforms Shinji Zanpakuto into a staff with a large ring on the top of it. Shinji is seen standing on top of a large flower construct, which closes around him for the duration of his Bankai. We learn that Shinji's Bankai, which translates to Reversed Evil 8 Treasure Blockade, has an ability called Yokoshima Happo Fusagiri. This inverts the perception of friend and foe as the soldat fire their arrows at each other, instantly wiping out the large group who are about to attack him. He notes that he needs to be careful when he uses his Bankai, because he is the only person unaffected by it, so it would risk his own allies turning against each other if he were to use it carelessly within the Serete. I also really like how the anime established the soldat as a threat big enough to warrant Shinji using his Bankai instead of just nuking them with a Sero. Even though this Bankai is designed for fighting weaker enemies, these enemies would have been troublesome to fight in their large numbers if they make even the likes of a lieutenant struggle. So it does make sense that Shinji had used his Bankai in this situation, and it overall just makes all of it just seem really believable and tied together with the events of the manga. Following this absolutely insane anime-only scene, we cut to another exclusive scene with Yumichika and Ikkaku, as Ikkaku is seen taking the shadow infiltration pill. Yumichika tells him that he now no longer has to worry about his Bankai being stolen from him. Ikkaku exercises caution, stating that it may be for the best if they just stay put and not recklessly move around. He has a bad feeling with his shadow being cast over the Serete. Hisagi then appears as Ikkaku asks why he is joining them. He states that he is lost as he struggles to navigate around the transformed landscape. Ikkaku says that the Quincy have distributed a high concentration of reishi from the shadows that they were hiding within. This is making it difficult for the Shinigami to search the Sternritters out. Frankly, they are blind as to where the enemy will strike from, as Ikkaku says that they need to be careful with how they move from now on. The 3 of them are then suddenly ambushed by the Sternritter Mask the Masculine, who appears to be involved in an anime-only fight with the 3 of them. Now James also appears on screen ringing the bell as Yumichika and Ikkaku strike first, but their attacks are effortlessly intercepted as Mask slams the 2 of them into each other and sends Yumichika into a building. When he is spinning around Ikkaku, Hisagi attacks by wrapping his chains of his Zanpakuto around the Sternritter's arm. Thankfully, this stops Mask from spinning Ikkaku any further. Now we then cut back to material from chapter 554 with Bambietta, and the anime does show the Bambis following her, which the manga doesn't do. In my opinion, this really improves upon her whole outburst about being embarrassed that she was abandoned by them. When Komamura appears onto the battlefield, we get some anime-only dialogue from him where he explains that he has come to avenge the death of Head Captain Yamamoto by eliminating Yhwach. In addition to this, we get another anime-only battle sequence between Shinji and Bambietta after she succumbs to the Shikai of Shinji. She emits a large blast and charges towards him yet again, exploding her surroundings as he asks her to call her friends to help her, but then says that she is all alone. This of course angers Bambietta, who is reminded of her embarrassment as she vows to beat the living hell out of him. We then cut back to Hisagi battling Mask as he manages to restrain him, yelling at Ikkaku to attack as he lands a satisfactory strike of his Hozokimaru in Mask's face. This appears to have successfully stunned the Sternritter. Episode 16 ends with Yhwach having activated the Sternritter's holy forms and him stating that this is where true despair begins for the Shinigami. You would notice that a lot of Yhwach's dialogue before the activation sequence is completely cut out of the anime. Yhwach explains that he had anticipated the fact that the Shinigami would regain their lost Bankai. Instead, the anime only shows us the panel of Yhwach telling the Sternritter to rejoice, as we then switch to the sequences of multiple Sternritter having their holy forms activated, though Yhwach's subsequent lines of the Shinigami regretting regaining their Bankai and that real despair for them has only just begun are kept within the anime. Now we see 7 glaring lights from the activated holy forms clearly on screen as we then transition into the ending song. Now it is to be noted that the last 2 panels of chapter 554 are not adapted into this episode because they involve Urahara with Mairi when Urahara suddenly receives a call from Ichigo. Now a lot of the Ichigo material from the manga is being reworked, which is understandable if you've been following what has been going on with his character in the last few episodes via the anime exclusive material that he has been involved in. Episode 16 builds upon this by including another post-credit scene which involves Ichigo on the road with no entry to the shrine, or in other words, Irazusando. Like last week, I'm going to be breaking down this scene in great detail. So we cut to the anime only post-credit scene which builds upon the material from the previous chapters, where Ichigo is seen within the realm that we know is now called Irazusando. He is shaking and he struggles to stay standing. The more that he continues to step forward, the heavier that he appears to be getting. After taking another step forward, he is hit with a wave of memories, and these appear to be the memories of the Soul King. The first shot appears to be of water. In the next very quick shot, we see someone standing from behind. They are within the water and they are holding a zanpakuto. Could this be an ancestor of the Tsuneyashiro family, the one who was responsible for dismembering the Soul King? We then see these feathered tips, which I'm not too sure what they represent, then a hand holding a golden ornament. Could this be the zanpakuto that the individual was holding earlier on? We then cut to somebody being lost in a vortex, and this scene in particular zooms out, which reveals 4 spinning vortexes. The vortex in the middle may represent the primordial Bleach world, with the Soul King in the middle of it, who was used by the noble families in order to create a new world. We are aware that the Soul King was sacrificed in order to create the human world, the Soul Society and Hueco Mundo, which may be represented by the 3 spinning vortexes around the individual in the middle. We are then shown 3 individual feathered tips, with each of them maybe representing the 3 realms that were created. Next up, we see the Soul King in his original form, but then his dismembered limbs are revealed to us. This is before we see the Soul King's limbless body suspended in the air, with the flashback ending with the Soul King as we see him today, trapped within a crystalline structure. It's really interesting to note that among the dismembered limbs suspended in the air is an arm that appears to be holding a zanpakuto. Did the Soul King have his own zanpakuto? If so, where is it now? Even in this shot here in the background, you can see the zanpakuto floating with the limbs. Ichigo literally sees all of these memories within the blink of an eye, as he asks what was that just now, as the weight once again becomes overwhelming as he shakes, struggling to stand. He then states that it doesn't matter what it is that he is seeing, as he has no choice but to keep moving forward. With each step that he takes, the memories stay longer within his mind, as Ichigo struggles to walk, saying that he can still go on. We are then very slowly shown the dismembering of the Soul King's limbs as Ichigo's head drops, and when he lifts it up, we see his eyes, which appear to have 4 additional pupils. Now these are reminiscent of the eyes of the Soul King, as well as Yhwach's eyes when he activates the Almighty. I believe that I was right with my assumption from last week that Ichigo is undergoing a test to see if he is worthy of becoming a Soul King candidate. Seeing the 4 pupils form within Ichigo's eyes has convinced me of this. Ichigo is facing difficulty as he inches closer to the shrine. He struggles to even slightly move forward as the memories of the Soul King overwhelm him. For now, these are all but glimpses into his training, so I'm looking forward to seeing what is revealed in the coming weeks of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime of Bleach, as Ichigo's role within the series is actually being reworked, with a lot more context being added into the anime. This week's episode of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime has been my favorite one out of all of the cour episodes we've had thus far. I absolutely loved all of the additions made during this week's episode, and honestly, when I'd heard that Kubo was going to be involved with the anime, I knew that he would be adding this type of material into it. Content that wasn't included within the manga, stuff that expands upon the roles of underutilized characters, and ultimately additional material which further expands upon the lore of Bleach. This week we got exclusive material involving an all-new Bankai reveal, which is just surreal. Shinji's Bankai was incredible to witness, from the way that it was animated to the music that was used, and not to mention the explanation of his powers, which are taken right out of Can't Be Your Own World. It was really handled with a lot of love and care, and additionally we got new material involving Hisagi, Ikkaku and Yumichika taking part in an all-new anime-only fight against Mask, which was totally unexpected. Could this be setting up for Hisagi playing more of a role within the final arc? Is Kubo planning to reveal his Bankai too? The last big exclusive scene was the post-credit scene, which once again left us with more questions than answers. Now, what were your favorite moments from episode 16 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime? I'm really looking forward to seeing more of the anime, when next week's episode titled Heart of Wolf, things are really kicking off with the prelude and setup to the second Quincy invasion well and truly over, and the major fights well and truly beginning from episode 17 onwards. Bleach episode 17 kicks off some of the main highly anticipated battles battles between the Shinigami and the Quincy, as we finally get to see Komamura vs Bambietta adapted into anime form. There is so much that's happening within this episode, including Komamura's humanization technique, his new Bankai reveal, and not to mention Hashward confronting Shunsui, and lastly Mask continuing his battle against Hisagi, Yumichika and Ikkaku. Evidently there is a lot to dive into, and during my episode review I did praise several aspects of this episode, but similar to other episodes there has been quite a lot of chopping and changing of events. Overall, episode 17 adapts 4.5 chapters worth of manga material spanning from the last 3 pages of chapter 555 all the way to the first 6 pages of chapter 560. There is one particular scene that spanned over 6 pages which I'll be talking about later in the video that wasn't included within this week's episode, but I am confident that it will be added next week, so be sure to stick around to the video to find out more details about this cutscene. Additionally, we had another minute-long post-credit scene this week which was super disturbing and it made me feel sick to my stomach. Make sure you stick around until the end of the video where I'll be explaining the details of this exciting post-credit scene and how it links back to the other post-credit scenes from earlier episodes. So as always, I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes which are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'm going to solely focus on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. There is a lot to discuss, so without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 17 of the Bleach 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Episode 17 begins with a brief scene before the intro where we see Yhwach stand from his seat and he states that this is where real despair begins. Now this is taken from the end of chapter 554 after all of the holy forms are activated for the Sternritter. The anime does a fantastic job of conveying this to us via different unique colours that have been attributed to each of the holy forms. Like the colour red for example represents Bambietta's holy form. Additionally, the anime reveals to us the impact of each of the holy forms activating by showing us the explosive wave that destroys nearby Shinigami after the holy forms are activated. Now this really lets you feel the scale of the battle currently unfolding, and it's a really nice addition to the episode which wasn't present within the manga. Now following this, we see material from the last 2 pages of chapter 555 with the Bambis reacting to the holy forms being released. Now the sequence of events is altered because in the manga this scene with Candice commenting on her wings having been activated occurs after Shinji is shot down by Bambietta, but in the anime we see the Bambis talking first before the intro song, and after the intro song we see Bambietta take out Shinji. The episode cuts to the opening after Giselle says that Bambietta is the last person who should be using a holy form because her fight might end quickly because she is dumb. The episode begins with Bambietta's blindingly red holy form with her red reishi shattering like glass, and this is taken from the end of chapter 555. Now the remainder of the material from the early portion of the chapter features Ichigo leaving the royal palace, and this isn't adapted into episode 17, and I do think that this may be included within future episodes after Ichigo completes his training. After Shinji is blasted away, we cut straight to material from chapter 556 where Bambietta comments on how Shinji had ruined her sense of direction, so she had decided to counterattack by firing her explosives in all directions. After Bambietta asks if the helmet that Komamura is wearing can withstand her attacks, the anime cuts a few panels of internal monologue from the manga during Bambietta launching a bomb towards Komamura, and it's of Komamura explaining that there is a momentary pause between impact and detonation in relation to a typical bomb, with an armor that is able to negate the impact of her bombs and a body that is strong enough to turn it aside, then it is possible to deflect her reishi bombs. Now this monologue is cut and we just skip to one of the bombs colliding with Komamura's armor on his forearm, and this is just because they are streamlining the content from the manga, because Bambietta explains how her bombs work immediately after this scene, so having Komamura incorrectly theorize that her bombs can be guarded against when in fact they can't is just redundant in my opinion, and I didn't mind this omission at all. After Komamura's human form is revealed following Bambietta's attack, we cut to a flashback called Humanification from chapter 556. The music and the overall atmosphere of this scene is so ominous and well executed, and it most certainly does the manga material justice because it adapts it one-to-one from the manga. Following the flashback, the anime has an exclusive scene of Komamura telling Momo to get Shinji to safety. This is an amazing addition because in the manga we kind of forgot that the two of them were on the battlefield, with the manga instead choosing to focus on Komamura immediately activating his new and improved armorless Bankai at the end of chapter 556. So it's nice that the anime goes back and actually gets rid of Momo and Shinji before this destructive Bankai is activated. Komomura's new Bankai is depicted within the anime with this amazing CG model which blends together elements of 2D and 3D art and animation in order to give us this overall beautifully adapted scene from the manga, and this really puts into scale the sheer size and power of his Bankai as well as its fearsome appearance. After Komomura explains that the Dangai-jo version of his Bankai has its armor removed, which exposes his spiritual pressure, we get a brief anime exclusive scene of his oversized Bankai chasing after Bambietta. This expands upon a couple panels of the manga where we see his Bankai try to crush her with its hand. However, the anime has this small chase sequence where his Bankai attempts to grab Bambietta a couple of times as she blasts it with her bombs but to no avail, and then his Bankai swings across the landscape to attack her as she avoids the attack. This additional scene is executed so well within the anime, and I think that they've done an amazing job to add these new scenes to this battle. During the exclusive scene, Bambietta is seen continuously attacking his Bankai, but her attacks are ineffective. A few lines of dialogue from Bambietta are streamlined in the anime, where she says, "I told you my ability turns whatever I fire my spiritual pressure at into bombs." The manga elaborates upon this with her saying that if his spiritual pressure is exposed, then that means that his weakness is exposed. But I guess these lines of dialogue were cut so that we could get those really cool new scenes of her and Komomura's Bankai clashing. When Komomura says that the armor of his Bankai represents life, the anime does a great job of visually showcasing this to us in comparison to the manga, as we get to see the armor of his Bankai on the ground. In the manga, after Komomura explains that the Dangai-jo version of his Bankai is armorless, so it has no life, we cut to a couple of panels where we see a plate containing Komomura's heart and his grand elder sat in front of it. Within the anime, this scene is rearranged and it's shown after Bambietta blasts Komomura's chest, and Komomura explains that the humanization technique is the secret of his clan, and he gains immortality while in a human form, which he obtains by offering his heart. We then see the rearranged manga panel of the heart inside the plate in front of his clan's elder. Now this does make a lot more sense in the anime, and it fits better with the sequence of events that are unfolding in comparison to how it abruptly appears within the manga. When Komomura explains that there is no reason for him not to stake his life in a battle Yamamoto had staked his life for, the manga shows Komomura's face with a silhouette of his beast form behind it. This is not visually shown within the anime because instead we just see him holding his Zanbakudo as he is repeatedly attacked by Bambietta while he speaks. Following Bambietta's defeat, we get a very brief but amazing scene of Komomura's Bankai setting its sights on Silburn, as we cut to Uryu and Yhwach with a view of the landscape of the battlefield, and then we see this tall, terrifying view of Komomura's Bankai in the distance looking straight towards the castle. Once again, the anime conveys the scale of the battlefield, showing us more than just the immediate area of any given fight, which is what is done within the manga. The anime instead effectively adds to the source material via these small scenes. Immediately following this, we get another anime-only scene of Komomura limping towards Silburn with his oversized Bankai following the worn-out captain. This is executed so effectively within the anime as we see how much Komomura really struggles to continue fighting. This is in contrast to the manga, where he immediately falls to his knees following Bambietta's defeat. While Komomura pleads with his heart to hold out a bit longer for his humanization technique to continue a bit more, he says that he must reach the Quincy's castle. The anime then shows us a shot of Yhwach, and this isn't in the manga. We see him reacting to Komomura struggling as he silently sits down and is shown to smile while watching the landscape of the city. Following this, Komomura tries to get up, stating that he must defeat Yhwach, and then the anime does a lot of justice to this scene, and it really is a tearjerker, with the soundtrack Soundscape to Adore playing in the background accompanying this struggle. The voice acting, animation and music all come together spectacularly during Komomura's transformation scene. We see his heart beating on the plate as his body begins to contort and transform into a mindless wolf. The visuals accompanied by the clan elder's words really bring the manga pages to life, ending the story of Komomura on a very bittersweet note. This scene of Komomura's silhouette being shown against a blue backdrop is so reminiscent of the typical werewolf transformations, and it was just a really nice stylistic choice by the anime staff. They really did an exceptional job with this scene in particular, because it is easily my highlight for episode 17. Now, there is one thing that I disliked about this particular scene in comparison to the manga, and it's the fact that they had omitted two pivotal manga panels from the anime. Now, this is after Iba carries Komomura and says that they will defeat Yhwach for Yamamoto's sake. In the manga, we are shown this really incredible shot of Komomura's face after he has transformed, and cour Kubo's art conveys the sadness in Komamura's eyes masterfully. Now, whenever I had read this back, it was a hint to me that Komamura could still understand what was being said to him, but he is now unable to respond after he has been transformed into an animal. It is the sad expression of the eyes which really impacted me when I read these pages in the manga, and the fact that it was cut from the episode is really disappointing. Instead of showing this, the anime has Iba walking away with Komamura as the title card Heart of Wolf appears above them on screen, and this wraps up the first half of the episode. It is disappointing because aside from this one nitpick that I have, this was honestly a very flawless scene and another one of my favorites from cour 2. After the mid-card, the episode transitions to other areas of the battlefield as we cut to two brief anime scenes where Uryu appears before Kangdu and BG9, bringing them to Yhwach after they were defeated. Now this once again adds context to the events within the manga because we never got to see how BG9 and Kangdu were brought in front of Yhwach for judgment. After the Bambis are seen towering over Bambietta, she pleads to Giselle not to do something to her, as the anime then skips the end of chapter 558, which actually reveals that Rukia and Renji are arriving in the Serete. Instead, the anime just cuts to the beginning of chapter 559 as we continue Hashwald's confrontation with Shunsui and Nanao. The anime strangely doesn't have the Wandenreich symbol abruptly appear behind Hashwald. Instead, he just lowers his Reiatsu and says understood to himself. Now this implies that he has just had an order communicated to him. I think that the manga does a better job of stopping Hashwald in his tracks here, because it comes as a surprise to not only him, but it even catches Nanao off guard. However, in the anime, this scene just seems fairly lackluster. Mask confronting Ikkaku, Yumichika and Hisagi from chapter 559 was adapted into episode 16 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. I did mistakenly say that it was an anime only scene, so my bad on that regard, but they had actually reworked this fight earlier into the story, because after Mask appears in front of the three of them, a scene following this from chapter 559 is not included within the anime, and it's of course a scene involving Hashwald and Yhwach passing judgment on BG9 and Kangdu following their defeats. Now these 6 pages from chapter 559 will most likely be shown in next week's episode. The anime instead decides to continue with anime original content, with Mask on the ground following Ikkaku striking his face, which we had seen in last week's episode. Ikkaku comments on the incredible explosion that has just erupted across the battlefield following Bambietta's defeat. Yumichika says that he had sensed 2 spiritual pressures from the vicinity of the blast. One of them was the enemy, and the other, Hisagi finishes off his sentence by stating that was Captain Komamura, who was also present. He attempts to rush to see if he is okay, but he is interrupted by James crying over Mask, as he then powers Mask, giving him energy to stand back up. He charges towards the three of them, and the anime only events sync up with the material from chapter 559 when we see Mask pin Hisagi down to a 3 count, perfectly matching up with what we see in chapter 559. Now as you've seen, the anime does an excellent job of squeezing in Mask's off-screen encounter with these 3 Shinigami over these last 2 episodes of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. The episode wraps up by adapting the first 6 pages of chapter 560 as we see Kensei and Rose appear in front of Mask just before he is about to stomp the life out of Hisagi. Now this scene ends with a few anime original changes as Mask jumps back from the 2 captains as he gets onto higher ground. He then challenges them to bring it as Kensei tells him not to worry because they won't take much of his time, as we then see Rose scoff, and then the episode ends with Mask chuckling. Now this is strange because the anime staff could have ended the episode on a dramatic cliffhanger with Kensei saying Bankai, which actually is the very next panel after Kensei reassures him that they won't take too much of his time. I guess we will have to see how things play out in next week's episode. I really am hoping that Kensei and Rose get some love with some anime exclusive scenes because they had a very lackluster performance in the manga. Anyway, we then cut to the credits, but be sure to stick around until the end of the song because we have another special treat. This week we have another anime original post-credit scene continuing Ichigo's journey down the strange path called Irazusando. He is panting heavily with the sound of rain pouring down. While he struggles to walk forward, Ichibei begins to speak. He states that the weight which Ichigo is feeling right now is the weight of everything that he is trying to protect, and the things that he is seeing within his eyes are actually eternal memories and revelations, which are the power of the Soul King. When he says this, Ichigo suddenly stops in his tracks as he is once again hit with a wave of memories. These are shown as we see an eyeball with 4 irises within it, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, with the memories unfolding within the center of the eye. It is to be noted that these memories we see see here are much clearer than what we had seen in last week's episode. The first is a much clearer shot of the Soul King from behind, standing in a pool of water, holding what appears to be a Zanpakuto. The second image is the Soul King stood in the center of a whirlpool with 3 whirlpools around him, and it appears as though this is a continuation from the first image to the second one, as I'm assuming that the story is being told in sequential order, with the next shot being the blue silhouette of the Soul King, and then we see his limbs removed, and then we have a abrupt explosion, as we then see imagery of the Quincy invading the Soul Society from 1000 years ago. Following this, we have an image of the original Gote 13 challenging the Quincy. Then we have an aerial shot of the Serete, and then lastly we see the Soul King in his crystallized prison within the royal palace. After Ichigo sees these memories, we see a side shot of his eye, and it appears to be normal as he has only one iris, but we then see multiple colors of spiritual pressure surrounding him as Ichigo struggles to maintain his balance. Now, we had seen this shot in particular within the trailers for Cour 2, and people had theorized that each of the spiritual pressure colors had represented a different aspect of Ichigo's powers and the different genetic races that he has inherited from his parents, like the yellow spiritual pressure representing his Shinigami powers, the blue representing his Quincy powers, the green representing his Fullbring powers, and lastly the red representing his Hollow powers. Now, what each of these colors represents have been theorized by fans, and I think that it does make sense, as it demonstrates how all of these aspects of power reside within Ichigo, and these powers had all originated from the Soul King, which explains why Ichigo is a worthy vessel to be a possible Soul King in the future. Now, towards the end of the scene, while the 4 spiritual pressures enter Ichigo's body, we can hear Ichibei ask if Ichigo is a vessel that is capable of withstanding the power that fills him right now, or if he is a vessel that will shatter as a result of the overwhelming power. Now, there is a truly disturbing scene that unfolds with the spiritual pressure rushing into Ichigo's body as he screams out. Now, we get a close-up shot of Ichigo's face, and those 4 irises are back again, which hints at him being a Soul King candidate. Now, the scene zooms out to show a silhouette of Ichigo being overwhelmed by power, and if you look closely, you will see the details of Ichigo's silhouette are obscured, and he resembles the form of the Soul King here. Then his body begins to expand and transform as we hear the disturbing screams of Ichigo in the background. This is really unsettling, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. Look at how the shape of Ichigo gradually transforms into something unrecognizable, as we recall Ichibei's words that this is a test to see if Ichigo is a vessel that is capable of withstanding this overwhelming power. With these strange growths covering his body, we see Ichigo raise his glowing Zanpakuto into the air. The Zanpakuto then begins to glow so brightly that the screen cuts to white as we see Ichigo panting as he looks forward. After this, we do in fact see Ichibei smile, which hints that Ichigo has passed his trial and he has incidentally completed his training. He is now ready to head towards the final member of the Zero Division as he begins to walk through the remainder of Irazu Sando, and he is then transported to the palace of Senjumaru. The anime draws this scene beautifully, and it's adapted from chapter 545, when we see her sitting in a palace with the different fabrics stylistically draped all around her. The post-credit scene ends with Ichigo asking what he has to do next. Episode 17 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime was incredibly emotional. I really struggle not to shed tears during Komamura's final moments in his human form. I thoroughly enjoyed how all of the scenes were handled during his battle against Bambietta, and aside from my nitpick that I had with how the first half of the episode ended, I can honestly say that the anime has done the manga a lot of justice here. We had some nice anime exclusive additions, like seeing a few more clashes between Bambietta and Komamura's Bankai, those incredible shots of Komamura's Bankai towering in the distance over the Wandenreich city with Yuobak watching on, and then we see Uryu pick up BG9 and Kangdu for judgment, as well as how the anime only battle between Mask and the 3 Shinigami had synced back up with chapter 559, and last but not least, the outright disturbing post-credit scene which wraps up Ichigo's journey down the path of Irazu Sando, and of course he has passed his trial, which was signaled by Ichibei smiling. Now, will we get a deeper explanation of the training that he has just undergone over the remainder of the episodes? Will we get to see new material involving Senjumaru's character, because we know that her scenes were cut from the anime where Renji and Rukia had a flashback of her demanding that they undress in front of her. I think that these scenes could easily be reworked for Ichigo, as Senjumaru was someone who we had already seen so little of within the manga, so I really hope that her role is expanded upon within the anime, and that we do get more scenes involving her. Now, definitely let me know all of of your thoughts about episode 17 Heart of Wolf. Did you guys get as emotional as I did during the sacrifice of Komamura's character? What were your favourite moments from episode 17 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime? I'm really looking forward to seeing more with next week's episode titled Rages at Ringside. It promises to show us more of the Sternritter mask as we continue with the real major battles of Cour 2. Bleach episode 18 continues where we had left off from last week's episode, which was a few pages into chapter 560, with the arrival of Kensei and Rose, who end up protecting Hisagi, Ikaku and Yumichika from the very obnoxious Sternritter Mask Demasculine, with the majority of episode 18 Rages at Ringside focusing on the fight against Mask. The anime staff do have some time to include all new scenes which are devoted to the Shinigami Research and Development Unit analysing the battlefield, with Shunsui getting a huge shout out by fulfilling his responsibility as the new head captain despite some negative remarks by Mayuri, who questions his ability as a leader. Additionally, we were shown Rukia taking Kensei and Rose to Isane, as well as a fascinating post-credit scene which involves Yuhabak reacting to the defeat of Mask, which is followed up by an exchange between Hashwad and Uryu, which is taken from chapter 565, but it has all new context and some mystery added to it, as we get a sense that Kubo and the anime staff are still concealing Uryu's true intentions from us. We know that this detail is carried forward from episode 1 of Cour 2, where Hashwad's conversation with his aide from chapter 554 was cut from the anime. Now in the manga, this is literally really early glimpses of Hashwad not trusting Uryu, which the anime is purposefully altering, and hopefully these changes pay off in Cour 3 and Cour 4. In addition to all of this, we also have Renji's battle against Mask, and it's really streamlined within the anime in comparison to the manga, so you definitely don't want to miss my comparison for this week's episode of Bleach. And as always, I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes which are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'm going to solely focus on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. So there's a lot to dive into, so without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 18 of the Bleach 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Before the intro song, we have an anime exclusive scene which nicely updates us on the progress of the battle. I really love these additions because once again, scenes like this serve to add to the scale of the battle presently unfolding. It helps us to be intimately familiar with all of the different parties involved and giving them more of a role than what they had within the manga. And in general, you're never going to hear me complaining about seeing more Urahara and Mayuri interactions. So the anime only scene begins by cutting to Mayuri's lab, where Urahara is present with Mayuri and several other members of Squad 12 who discuss some statistics regarding how the Shinigami are currently faring against the Quincy. They must be running some advanced models of probability, as they estimate that after the Serite was replaced by the Quincy City, they have a 42% chance of survival, taking into account all of the currently wounded. Additionally, they estimate that the effectiveness of their current strategy is at 30%. The sentiment shared by Akon is a mixture of shock and frustration, as he wonders how the Quincy were able to do so much in such a short amount of time. They have effectively taken advantage of the confusion following the Shinigami being robbed of their familiar surroundings, after the shadow was cast over the Serite, replacing the entire landscape of the battlefield with one that the Shinigami know nothing about. This was also highlighted in earlier episodes when Hisagi had admitted to Ikaku and Yumichika that he had gotten lost wandering the Quincy City, looking for enemies. Urahara adds to Akon's comments by saying that the Quincy had taken advantage of the chain of command being disrupted following the chaos and confusion caused by the change of the landscape. Akon asks about the physical condition of the wounded, as we are updated on the status of Soifon, Omaida, Hitsugaya and Rangiku. Additionally, we learn that the captain of Squad 11, Kenpachi Zaraki, is not responding, but Akon tells them to leave Squad 11 alone, which honestly is such an amazingly well nuanced line that they have added to the anime. Squad 11 are the fighting force of the Shinigami, and this line by Akon solidifies that they don't need to really give them any advice on how to do their job. Nobody else can cut down their opponents like Kenpachi can. Akon continues to ask about the other Shinigami, learning that Rose and Kensei are in good condition and they are responding to a situation at the moment. Urahara doesn't sound too positive, as he states that at this rate, the Shinigami who have survived so far will be hunted down by the Quincy. Mayuri then passes his own judgment over the situation, stating that the Shinigami fighting need to try everything on their own. He will be doing exactly the same. He recommends for them to use their own judgment and to try everything on their own accord, because if they were acting on their own judgment management, then they wouldn't have time to be getting shaken up by the Quincy's tactics. Shunsui then calls them as we properly see him take up a leadership role here, but this isn't before Mayuri has an opportunity to take a jab at him. He tells him that while he was sipping tea with Hashward, the effectiveness of their current strategy has dropped to 30%. Shunsui jokes that he had run out of tea and the opponent was about to sip on his blood, but Mayuri has little sympathy for him, stating that as long as he is alive, then he should be able to get back to work. This is Mayuri underestimating the newly appointed head captain as he continues to question if he can manage the subordinates currently on the battlefield. Shunsui sarcastically thanks him for his assistance as he speaks to Mayuri about an updated version of a map that's currently being sent to all of the Shinigami on the battlefield. We see them all checking their devices as Shunsui speaks to the Shinigami about how the map is being updated as the enemy continues to make their move, stating that the red marks are the locations of the other Shinigami on the battlefield, and he orders them to meet up with the closest seated officer to them regardless of their division, and they've been ordered to follow any instructions that they receive from their superior ranking Shinigami. He encourages the Shinigami not to be disheartened by the tactics of the enemy, who are trying to isolate them and to take them out one by one. Shunsui's orders here intend to improve the morale amongst the Shinigami and to get them to snap out of their confusion and to work together. He ends the call amazingly by telling them to get back on their feet and to continue fighting. This literally is amazing. He didn't entertain Mayuri's taunts, and the anime through this additional scene gave Shunsui some much needed screen time, allowing us to see him fulfill his duty as a head captain. Shunsui has a gap of absence in the manga during this portion of the story, with his encounter with Hashward ending in chapter 559, and we don't really see him again until chapter 604, so I think that it was necessary to include this exclusive scene into the anime, and I have to commend Kubo and the anime staff for this addition. So after the introductory scene, we cut to the opening song as the episode then begins where we had left off with material from chapter 560. The episode begins with Kensei activating his Bankai Tekken Tachikaze. After Kensei punches the Sternritter in the stomach, some inner monologue from James reacting is cut from the anime. In the manga, he says that he cannot believe that Mister is on his knees after one hit. After Mask recovers and attacks Kensei and Rose, a line of dialogue is cut in the anime at the end of chapter 560, and it's after Mask introduces himself as Sternritter S. In the manga, he also says that the cheers are my source of power. Chapter 561 is very faithfully adapted into episode 18 with little to no overall changes between the manga chapter in comparison to the anime episode, with the arrival of Renji at the end of the chapter concluding the first half of the episode, which takes us into the mid-card. When Mask calls James to heal his ears, a few manga panels are cut from the anime. The cut material is inconsequential lines from James asking if Mister had called him, and then we see Renji reacting to what's going on, wondering how on earth James is still alive while he has literally been cut in two. In the manga, Mask asking James for cheers and stating that he likes to be cheered on by his fans is cut from the anime. The anime overall here skips half a page of manga material, and it just cuts to James saying "cheer up superstar" as he begins to heal his eardrums. After Mask's eardrums are healed, about 7 pages of manga content is cut from the anime, and I'll go over the contents of these 7 pages of removed material here. In the manga, after Mask gloats to Renji about having his ears healed, Renji states that he is one creepy dude. The Sternritter then states that he had heard the insult and it is unforgivable. He charges towards him with a star rocket headbutt, but Renji strikes him down with his elbow as he crashes into the ground. Mask then gets back up stating that he had dodged his attack and even landed an elbow, as it appears as though Renji is lucky. He then says that Renji has made one mistake because his attack just now has angered him. He then draws his attention to the star crest that has formed on his fist, and it appears when he is angry. He explains that the crest is a sign that he has chosen to defeat evil. He then unleashes his attack Murder Punch. He explains that this punch is 10 times more powerful with the star crest, for it is the Iron Hammer of Justice, telling him to quietly die as his brains are beaten out by the power of justice. Now once again, when the smoke clears, we see Renji having intercepted his fist, saying to him what's wrong. Is he struggling to kill a Shinigami with a murder punch? Mask is then further angered by this, asking him if he thinks that it is acceptable for a villain to catch the fist of a hero. He then repeatedly throws fists of justice towards Renji, but he evades the attacks and instead cuts up James into pieces. In the manga, Mask asks how he was cut up, as Renji explains while he was busy throwing his punches, he had gone ahead and taken care of James. Now this is everything that the anime has cut, and as a result, in the anime, James isn't cut into pieces. Instead, he is cut cleanly by a single slash from Renji. After Renji cuts James and says that this should stop Mask from coming back to life, we cut to an anime exclusive scene of Rukia flying to get help for Kensei and Rose. She realizes that she needs to hurry because both of their spiritual pressures are getting weaker. However, she wonders how she is going to find refuge from the Quincy in order to help them. Thankfully, she senses the Reiatsu of someone who can help nearby. We cut to the inside of the ruins of a building where Isane and some Squad 4 members have set up a temporary medical facility healing the wounds of the injured. Rukia tells Isane that Rose and Kensei are in critical condition. They need immediate treatment. While brief, this anime exclusive scene once again shows us what is going on across the different areas of this battlefield. It makes the situation seem way more believable in the anime. The manga has a habit of usually sticking to a singular point and it moves on to other areas after a battle is resolved. But the anime is amazingly making these additions and really fleshing out aspects of the second Quincy invasion which build upon the source material. Overall, it gives anime-only viewers a richer experience of the Bleach story. Manga readers are also having a fresh experience of the Thousand Year Blood War arc thanks to the alterations that Kubo is making. And one such change that Kubo has made to the story is in the post-credit scene of this week's episode, which I'll talk about later on. Following Rukia's brief anime-only scene, we cut back to Renji vs Mask where he has just cut him across his body, which occurs right at the end of chapter 562. After Mask activates his star power-up form, an entire page from chapter 563 is cut from the anime. It is following Renji asking why does his mask also change when he powers up. Mask states that he remembers Renji, saying that he was the one that he had drop-kicked during the first Quincy invasion, explaining that superstars don't remember every enemy that they have defeated, so he had forgotten until now who Renji was. Renji, on the other hand, is surprised that he has only now realized who he has been fighting. Mask says that he has no idea how Renji was able to get so strong in such a short amount of time, but he should feel proud that he is about to bear witness to his true power. The anime cuts out all of this and instead has Mask charge towards Renji after he powers up. Renji's new Bankai is animated really well within the anime as the lighting becomes really dark and it's overcast by this red tone, as we see the fingers of the baboon side of his Bankai crack into place and it looks really creepy, and it overall adds to this whole hero and villain dynamic that's going on during Renji's battle against Mask. Now, when we get the flashback of Renji recalling Ichibei telling him the real name of his Bankai, it is pretty much adapted one-to-one from the manga, and the anime retains important details from the manga, like the information that Ichibei had revealed that he holds the name Manako Osho, which was given to him by the Soul King, and it means the one who speaks the true name. The episode then wraps up with Renji unleashing his Zaga Teppo ability, which ends up defeating Mask before we cut to the end credits. But as usual, we have a post-credit scene this week, and it isn't involving Ichigo this time. The first 4 pages of chapter 565 are not included within this anime episode. These pages were adapted into the first scene of Cour 2 at the start of episode 14, where we saw the birth of Yuhobak in that stunning visual sequence. Now, the anime scene did not really explain what was going on, but that intro segment in the manga was fully narrated. The post-credit scene includes material from chapter 565, but the context of the conversation and the setting is entirely different. Some deliberate alterations were made here in order to give Uryu more of a nuanced role within the story, as Hashward isn't as hostile towards him in the anime in comparison to his role within the manga. So the post-credit scene begins with Yuhobak reacting to the death of James, stating that he did well as he orders him to come back home to the origin of his powers, as the theme of this post-credit scene is centered around establishing Yuhobak as the father of all Quincy, and how once the Sternritter are killed, their power returns to Yuhobak and it empowers him. Fragments of Mask transform into Reishi and they are absorbed into Yuhobak's body. In the manga, you'll note that Uryu isn't with Yuhobak here, but in the anime he is right next to him and he is surprised to see what is going on, as a dark shadow then covers the Quincy leader's body and he ends up disappearing, as the shadow then creeps across the floor and it appears to hit into an invisible wall where Hashward suddenly appears from out of nowhere. The shadow then fires past Hashward, indicating that Yuhobak has left something behind with him while he takes his leave to rest. Uryu is surprised to see Hashward, who explains to him that His Majesty Yuhobak is currently asleep. While sleeping, he returns to being the father of Quincy's in order to save his strength. While he is asleep, nothing should interrupt him. Uryu asks why he is here. He explains that Yuhobak and himself are connected, but he then corrects himself, stating that Yuhobak is actually connected to all of the Quincy, but he says that Uryu must already know about this, to which he agrees. Now Hashward speaks about information that Uryu won't know about, asking if he knows why Yuhobak has such immense power, as well as what the nature of Yuhobak is. He states that he will not find the answers to these questions within even his grandfather Soken Ishida's research documents. Hashward ends the conversation by supposing that he should let Uryu know about Yhwach considering he is Yhwach's successor. So some of this exchange between Hashward and Uryu is taken from pages 5 to 10 of chapter 565. However, the manga doesn't include the scene of Yhwach transforming into a shadow and Hashward appearing. Instead, in the manga, Uryu is seen walking to Yhwach's chambers, and some dialogue lines end up being cut from the anime, like Hashward asking him abruptly what is it that he wants. He is very impatient with Uryu in the manga, ordering him to cut to the chase and to state his purpose for wanting to see Yhwach. Uryu, in another panel that's cut from the anime, says that it is none of his business. He doesn't need to explain to him why he needs to see Yhwach, noting that Hashward seems different from the daytime. So the uncomfortability is removed from their conversation here, as the anime continues to highlight Hashward as feeling neutral towards Uryu, in comparison to the manga, where his doubts about him are well established at this point in the story. It is evident that Kubo is using cour 2 to set up some plot lines which will be explored deeper into cour 3 and 4. Uryu's traitor storyline is going to be further expanded upon, and is going to be given a bit more believability in the anime, and hopefully it culminates into an epic showdown against Ichigo, which we didn't get to see within the manga. I love how the anime dials back Hashward's out of character hostility. We had assumed up until now that he was being impatient and ratty here because he was in possession of Yhwach's power, and this was affecting or influencing his mood. As Uryu had stated in the manga, he notes that he seems to be awfully different from the daytime, but the anime cuts this line, meaning that Hashward is still calm and composed, even while looking after Yhwach's power while he is asleep. I do wonder how the anime is going to continue with this exchange in episode 19, because it is in chapter 565 where Hashward literally confronts Uryu, stating that he has only joined the Sternritter in order to avenge the death of his mother. I never really liked how soon this was done in the manga, and it just seems rushed, so we can expect these lines to be cut and possibly included later on in like cour 3 or 4, I suppose. The next logical step is for Hashward to explain the nature of Yhwach's powers and how they work to Uryu, which also occurs in chapter 565. So all of these scenes may well be included in the next episode, but with Hashward's hostility and feelings of suspiciousness removed, I guess. Episode 18 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime was really intense, and there were several changes made in comparison to the manga, with the additions made for Shunsui's scene at the beginning of the episode, Isane helping the Shinigami in the middle of the episode, and the reworked material from chapter 565 during the post-credit scene. Now, there was also some material that was skipped over in episode 17 from chapter 559, and it involves BG9 and Kangdu's judgment scene, which I had assumed would be adapted into this week's episode. However, once again, we didn't end up seeing it in episode 18. I wonder if they have actually skipped over this scene, which effectively brings an end to Kangdu and BG9's character while also showcasing Hashward's power the balance. This was quite a pivotal moment in the manga, so I wonder if the anime will be giving these two Sternritters a second chance. Bleach episode 19 adapts a considerable amount of manga material continuing on from the end of chapter 565, which showcased the end of Mask vs Renji's battle from last week's episode. This week we have around 7 chapters worth of manga material adapted, spanning from chapters 554 to 570. The episode begins with material from chapter 554 to 555, which covers Ichigo leaving the royal palace and making his call with Kisuke Urahara. Then after the intro song, we have material from chapter 559 of Kangdu and BG9's execution, which is streamlined to include talking points from chapter 565 between Hashward and Uryu. And lastly, we have a stretch of 5 chapters spanning from chapter 566 to 570, which adapts the Rukia vs Asnod battle into the anime, including a post-credit scene which sets up the next episode with Yachiru and Isane being confronted by the Sternritter Guana Lee. There is quite a lot of streamlining of events within this week's episode, with whole scenes being reworked in order to fit the new continuity that the anime is establishing around Uryu's character in particular. So as always, I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes which are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'm going to solely focus on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. There is a lot to dive into, so without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 19 of Bleach's 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Episode 19 begins by adapting material from chapter 555 after Ichigo completes his training with Ichibei and acquires his Oken clothing from Senjumaru. Unfortunately, the cut material from Renji and Rukia's meeting with Senjumaru was not reworked for Ichigo, so it remains omitted from the anime. Now the material from chapter 555 is streamlined and reworked. The first difference occurs after Ichigo tells Kurinji that he is ready. A few panels from the manga are cut and replaced by a new interaction. The anime decides to have Ichigo complain about his clothing to Senjumaru. Kurinji and Kiryu are also present here, and on a side note, Kiryu is present from the very beginning of this scene, in comparison to the manga where she appears later on just as Ichigo leaves. Now in the anime, Ichigo asks if his clothing is a bit much, because he feels like he is unnecessarily overdressed. Senjumaru explains to him that the clothing that she has made will help him to pass through the 72 layers of protection that exist between the royal palace and the Soul Society. She then sarcastically questions if he still thinks that his clothing is not necessary. The anime ended up including this scene instead of Ichigo looking around, which is in the manga, and asking where the pillar is that they had rode up to the royal palace on. Kurinji tells him that it's not here, before telling him that he is traveling back to the Serite on foot, to which Ichigo reacts in shock. Kurinji reassures him not to be surprised as he tells Senjumaru to summon the stairs. The anime removes all of this and instead has Senjumaru summon the stairs after she tells Ichigo about his clothing. The anime does a fantastic job of animating the stairs materializing in thin air, and it fantastically conveys to us the scale of Ichigo's journey that he is about to embark on. One thing to note about this scene that occurs at the beginning of the episode is the demeanor of Ichigo. There is a big change in how the anime depicts Ichigo in comparison to the manga. The manga has him overreacting in some panels and joking around. However, the anime is consistent in ensuring that Ichigo remains calm and collected, not letting anything affect his frame of mind. This is demonstrated by how he reacts in the anime in comparison to the manga in response to Kurinji telling him that it will take a week for him to get back to the Serite. In the manga, Ichigo exclaims a week and he panics that the Quincy will have already started their attack within that time. The anime cuts this out and skips to the next panel where Ichigo calms himself down and says that everything should be still alright. The anime cuts some dialogue from Kurinji asking if Ichigo is sure because it's a long journey, and Ichigo argues back with him that he had just said that it wasn't that far. The anime instead skips to the next panel where we hear Ichigo explain how it will only take him half a day to return to the Serite if he rushes. This is again the anime streamlining scenes in order to ensure that important details are conveyed without adapting redundant lines that exist to pad out the manga chapters. After Ichigo calmly explains how he will get back faster, some panels of Kurinji reacting and Ichibei laughing in the distance are cut from the anime. Ichigo remains level-headed until Ichibei tells him that the Quincy had attacked 3 hours ago, which I think is way more effective as the anime remains consistent by conveying to us how much Ichigo has changed by not letting the taunts of the Zero Division get to him. He only yells after he learns that he is running late. This helps us to appreciate the comments made by the Zero Division later, when they speak about how much Ichigo has grown since he had arrived within the royal palace. Speaking of these comments, the anime also streamlines these remarks from the Zero Division. After Kiryu throws the food to Ichigo, a line of dialogue where he tells her that he will eat the food if he gets hungry in the middle of a battle is cut from the anime. A couple of panels are cut from the anime where Kiryu comments on Ichigo having gotten so much stronger that she sees a visible change in comparison to how he was when they had first met him, noting that his spiritual pressure was so shaky at the start. The anime instead shows a streamlined scene of Ichibei explaining how Ichigo has become a true Shinigami now. Ichibei's lines are also streamlined, with the anime removing a lot of the rambling that is present within the manga, because he goes back and forth with his choice of words to describe Ichigo's change, but the anime just cuts to the chase. We then cut to material that wasn't adapted into earlier episodes from the end of chapter 554, with Urahara receiving a call from Ichigo. The scene is then continued in chapter 555 when Ichigo reassures Urahara to hold out a little bit longer until he gets there. This is superbly adapted from the manga, and I love that the anime had kept this scene because it highlights the maturity of Ichigo. This is the culmination of his long journey to learn and accept the truth about his mother, as well as acquiring his true Zanpakuto and succeeding Ichibei's trial. He now calls Urahara, who reacts surprised, which indicates that he can feel a change in Ichigo just by hearing his voice. This is just superb, and I just wanted to fangirl over this moment, which the anime does a great job of getting right. After the intro song, we continue with Hashwald's conversation with Uryu, which is adapted from chapter chapter 565, as the context and dialogue from this exchange is altered and reworked to include the execution of Kangdu and BG9 from chapter 559. The most notable changes between the anime and the manga is Uryu accompanying Hashward, in comparison to the manga where Hashward passes judgment on them with Yhwach beside him. The execution scene in the anime cuts all of the dialogue from BG9 and Kangdu as they remain silent. There are several differences in comparison to the anime and the manga for this scene in particular, so I'm going to begin by talking about the anime version before explaining how the manga had handled the execution of Kangdu in BG9. In the anime, Hashward tells Uryu to come with him as we get some amazing anime-only visuals of the inside of Silburn, with the blue flames lighting up the passageways of the castle. We then see Hashward and Uryu walk past a row of soldiers as they stand in front of Kangdu and BG9 who are kneeling on the ground, as one of the soldiers states that judgment will now be passed on to those who were defeated in battle. Uryu watches as Hashward raises his blade in the air and strikes Kangdu, as the Sternritter Grandmaster then recalls that Kangdu has the Shrift ability the Iron, stating that he should thank his good fortune, but the scale of a battle must be fair. He explains that lives that were saved by good fortune will be removed by an equivalent amount of misfortune. The streamlined anime scene adapts Hashward's scales tipping, as Kangdu reacts in fear, utterly speechless, as Hashward cuts him down effortlessly, bypassing his ability the Iron. He then goes on to eliminate BG9 with Uryu watching on in horror. The execution within the manga was very different because it takes place over 5 pages from chapter 559. It begins with Yhwach ordering Hashward to pass judgment on the 2 defeated Sternritter. The manga panels involving BG9 pleading for his life are removed from the anime when he tells them that they have only temporarily lost, and that the 2 of them can still be of use to Yhwach because they were revived by the activation of their holy forms. In addition to BG9 pleading, the manga panel where Yhwach states that they were fortunate to have escaped death is also cut from the anime. Hashward's dialogue about lives being saved by good fortune needing to be removed by a same amount of misfortune occurs before he strikes Kangdu in the manga. The manga emphasizes BG9 panicking, which isn't included in the anime. The manga has Kangdu reminding Hashward of his ability the Iron, and this is after Hashward appears to be surprised that his attack didn't cut Kangdu. And this is in contrast to the anime where Hashward is already aware of what has happened, as he explains that Kangdu's Shrift ability had stopped the attack. In the manga, Kangdu taunts Hashward to attack him again, as he exclaims that he will not be killed by anyone other than Yhwach. These lines of dialogue are cut from the anime, and unfortunately the anime heavily streamlines this scene, but on the other hand it does a fantastic job of giving us our first glimpse of Hashward's Shrift ability the Balance. Following the execution scene, Hashward continues speaking to Uryu in the anime, and the conversation is centered around the nature of Yhwach, with dialogue taken from chapter 565 but reworked slightly to fit the new context and tone of the scene. Like last week, there is less hostility towards Uryu here, and more importantly, Hashward does not suspect him to have joined the Quincy for the purpose of avenging the death of his mother after Yhwach had casted Ashwaunen over 9 years ago. In the anime, Hashward reacts to Uryu's surprised expression after the execution, saying that he doesn't seem to understand what is going on, explaining that everyone who has been gifted a piece of Yhwach's soul will have their powers returned to Yhwach after they die. After regaining these powers, Yhwach will grow stronger. Uryu, in an anime-only line, tells Hashward that the 2 Sternritter that he had just cut down were valuable assets to Yhwach's army. Was it necessary to have taken their lives? Hashward states that Yhwach decides what is necessary and unnecessary, explaining to him that Uryu had acquired his own Shrift from Yhwach after partaking in the engraving ritual where he had drank Yhwach's blood. He explains that fighting is Yhwach's means of living. When Hashward states that if Yhwach doesn't continue absorbing souls, the next line is muted in the anime. But in the manga, we are aware that Hashward finishes his sentence here by saying that Yhwach will eventually return back to a state where he is unable to see, hear, or move. The anime decides to keep this vague as it streamlines the explanation of the nature of Yhwach from chapter 565. I'm sure that the anime will include a lot of this cut content from the end of chapter 565 into future episodes. Chapter 565 also features Hashward explaining how Yhwach's powers work. The anime cuts mentions of Yhwach's past, as the manga chapter explains that Yhwach had the power to share his soul with those around him ever since he was a child. This is then compared to how how ordinary Quincy have the power to gather reishi from their surroundings and to manipulate it into their own power. Yhwach, on the other hand, has an opposing power. He has the ability to share his soul with others. The manga explains how he had shared his soul via touch when he was younger, and he then discovered a more efficient method to share his soul, which involves engraving letters onto other souls. And this allows for a deeper, more powerful part of his soul to be shared with others. I mentioned this earlier, but the anime removes Hashwald's confrontation here, where he reveals his suspicions to Uryu. This again is in line with the anime deciding to expand upon Uryu's role, convincing us that he is a fully fledged member of Yhwach's army, with Hashwald being lenient towards him in the anime, which I prefer a lot more in comparison to how this exchange was handled within the pages of the manga. The scene ends with Hashwald's final line muting, as the rest of chapter 565 is not adapted, where we see Yhwach awakening from his sleep. The anime then cuts to material from chapter 566, but it removes two scenes which span across 5 pages from the beginning of this chapter. The first is of Rukia and Renji falling from the royal palace, traveling to the Serete, as Rukia advises Renji to hide after each battle so that the enemy doesn't have a chance to ambush him. The second scene involves Renji waking up from a nap after having defeated Mask, stating that he thinks that he has hidden long enough, but we then see the Sternritter Nanana behind a pillar who appears to have been observing him this entire time. All of this is not included within the anime, as we are instead shown Rukia traveling across the battlefield. A panel from the manga where Rukia comments on how she was able to sense the spiritual pressure of Isane is cut from the anime, and then subsequent shots of Isane healing Kensei and Rose are also removed. This is because of the anime only scene that we had last week, where Rukia was shown to drop off the 2 captains to Isane during Renji's battle against Mask. The remainder of chapter 566 is faithfully adapted into the anime. After Rukia activates the true form of Sodono Shirayuki, a few panels of Aznot commenting on her confidence are cut from the anime. In the manga, after Aznot fires several spikes at her in response to her challenging him to try to attack her again, he reminds her that she was running away from his attacks just a moment ago. The anime instead cuts to the panel where Rukia explains how her body needed to become accustomed to Sodono Shirayuki's true power. Aznot's explanation of fear and relief from chapter 567 is accompanied by some amazing anime exclusive visuals which frighteningly bring his words to life, as he explains how relief is tied to life and fear is tied to death. I really love the addition of these visuals, which do a great job of emphasizing the theme of Aznot's character. Additionally, during this scene we get some really revealing imagery of Rukia, which I think Taguchi and the anime staff had attempted to make up for Rukia's Pete scene, which was removed from Cour 1 and I know had disappointed a lot of people. At the end of chapter 567, after Rukia freezes Aznot with her absolute zero ability, scenes of Aznot wondering if this is fear are cut from the anime. After Rukia slowly restores her body temperature from absolute zero and Aznot reveals that he has survived her attack from chapter 568, we then cut to Aznot's backstory, which is adapted from chapter 570, but it's been rearranged into the anime to happen earlier on in comparison to the manga. During Aznot's backstory, a manga panel revealing a German Bible on his bedside drawer is cut from the anime. After Yhwach arrives and states that he will bestow power upon him, we cut to a visual of the letter F, referencing the shrift ability the fear which Aznot was granted. After this, we cut back to material from chapter 568 with Aznot breaking free from being frozen solid. After Aznot tells her that it is useless to attack because she won't reach him because her feet are cringing, a panel of Rukia responding is cut from the anime. She asks if he is suggesting that her body is starting to feel fear, stating that it can't be because her body is, but then she ends up being interrupted by Aznot. This panel is cut for the sake of streamlining the dialogue, and Rukia doesn't really say anything of significance here anyway. When Rukia attempts to close her eyes to stop her optic nerves from being affected by the Sternritter's powers, we get another amazing anime-only scene of Ichigo, Orihime and Byakuya with their faces decomposing, and this is similar to what Byakuya had imagined during his battle against Aznot when he had seen the face of Rukia decomposing. Rukia is also covered in flies, similar to how Byakuya was, as the feeling of fear being instilled within her is emphasized within the anime via these impactful anime exclusive visuals. These additions really build upon the manga, improving on the source material massively, with the amazing voice acting from Aznot combined with these all new scenes. After Byakuya arrives to help Rukia, we cut to the mid-card, which occurs really late into this week's episode. The first half of the episode adapts up to the end of chapter 568, leaving about 2 chapters of manga material to be adapted into the rest of the episode. A manga panel from the start of chapter 569 of Rukia thinking to herself that Asnod had challenged her in order to lure out Byakuya is cut from the anime. Instead, we cut to her warning Byakuya not to look into his eyes. Byakuya acknowledging Rukia was adapted incredibly from chapter 569. I love the expression of Rukia's eyes here, as we really feel how impactful Byakuya's heartfelt words were. They truly mean a lot to her. With Rukia affirming that she doesn't hold any fears right now, the outro song begins to play as we are treated to a phenomenal scene involving the activation of Rukia's Bankai, with Rukia affirming that she doesn't hold any fears right now, with the music, visuals and incredible voice acting of Rukia's voice actor as she says Haka no Togame, which in all honesty left me utterly speechless. The anime really does an amazing job of capturing the scale of Rukia's attack, which engulfs the surroundings, instantly freezing Asnod. During the credits, we get the first half of chapter 570 adapted, with Byakuya complimenting Rukia's Bankai and advising her to handle it with care. This was a deeply emotional scene. It really had me welling up with tears seeing how far Rukia has come, and seeing the resolution of Byakuya and Rukia's bond, which started out so flawed but now is perfectly wrapped up with Byakuya acknowledging her and complimenting how far she has come. I honestly couldn't stop smiling throughout all of this amazing scene. How great did Rukia's Bankai look at the end of the episode? They did so much justice to it that it really does fit the title of one of the most beautiful Bankai within all of the Soul Society. Following the resolution of Rukia's battle against Asnod, we begin the next major encounter as the post-credit scene of episode 19 adapts material from the second half of chapter 570. This is adapted faithfully from the manga, aside from one manga panel that is cut from the anime, and it involves Yachiro exclaiming that the Quincy have some nice bedding, as Isane tells her that she is talking too loudly. The episode ends with the introduction of Sternritter v the Vanishing Point Guanal Lee, who confronts both Isane and Yachiro, with episode 19 having adapted all the way up to the end of chapter 570. Episode 19 was really intense. There were a lot more changes to some scenes than I was expecting, like Senjumaru being given new lines of dialogue at the start of the episode, with Ichigo leaving the royal palace being streamlined, and then Kangdu and BG9's execution being trimmed down to make room for this calm exchange between Hashward and Uryu. Despite all of this cramming in of material, I really think that the anime did a lot of justice to Rukia's battle against Asnod. It was terrifying, emotional and jaw-dropping, with the way that Asnod's fear was showcased, with the frightening anime exclusive visuals, and not to mention the contrastingly beautiful Bankai of Rukia, which ended the battle on a really high note, allowing us to see the amazing conclusion to Byakuya and Rukia's story, which began all the way back in the Soul Society arc. Episode 19 was truly dedicated to Rukia, and I really think that the anime staff exceeded all of our expectations with this surreal episode. What were your thoughts about episode 19, The White Haze? Did you enjoy the episode as much as I did? There were several changes in comparison to the manga, with material being adapted from multiple different chapters, with it being evident that scenes are being meticulously rearranged in order for the new Bleach anime to tell an altered, more expanded version of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, which builds upon what Kubo has established within the manga. I am really excited for episode 20, which will feature the return of a very popular Shinigami who is going to be battling an absolutely unhinged Sternritter, so you definitely don't want to miss next week's episode titled I Am the Edge. Bleach episode 20 adapts the most amount of manga material out of all of the episodes that we have received thus far. We pick up from the post-credit scene of last week's episode, which adapts up to the end of chapter 570, where the Sternritter Guanal Lee confronts both Isane and Yachiro. This week's episode adapts a whopping 8.5 chapters worth of manga content, spanning from chapters 571 to 579. The episode begins with material from chapter 571 as it adapts the first 9 pages before we cut to the opening song. After the intro, the first half of the episode adapts the rest of chapter 571 all the way up until the end of chapter 573 as we reach the mid-card of the episode. The second half of the episode covers material from chapter 574 to 578 before the end credit song begins. And then lastly, we have the post-credit scene for this week, which adapts the first half of chapter 579, and thus bringing an end to Kinpachi's battle against Gremi. Because of there being so much content that is covered within this episode, there is way more streamlining and cutting of content than usual, with little to no anime only scenes this week, aside from panels being animated with more context in comparison to the manga, like where we are shown Yachiro falling down the crack that Gremi makes, or showing Isane rescue Kensei and Rose in a bit more detail when they fall from the elevated platform. Rest assured, I'm going to be covering every cut and change that has been made, and as always, I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes that are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'll be solely focusing on what has been cut, changed, and added to the anime. Understandably, there is a lot to cover in this video, so without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 20 of Bleach's 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. The episode begins with a 1-minute scene before the intro song adapting the first 9 pages of chapter 571. Now this is where we see Yachiro and Isane continue their confrontation with Guanal Lee. This encounter is streamlined with some manga panels featuring unnecessary dialogue cut from the anime, like Isane asking Guanal if he is one of the Sternritters. The anime decides to cut to the chase and it just has him explaining who he is. Now there are similar instances of streamlining like this throughout the entirety of this episode. Guanal explaining how his shrift ability works is slightly altered in the anime, and this is so that the production team can continue with this trend of streamlining content for this episode. The anime removes a page of dialogue where Guanal is rambling about how he can switch from version 1 and 2 of his power in order to attack his target while he is invisible, as well as him explaining that he can switch between both versions instantly, so even if his opponent figures out where he is attacking from, he can erase his own existence with version 2. And additional panels of where he states that his powers are like a one-sided game that he can never lose, and him exclaiming how much fun he is having, are also cut from the anime. After he activates version 3 of his shrift, we cut to the opening song. Immediately after the intro song, there is a cut manga panel where Guanal explains that his version 3 allows him to make his targets forget about his existence. After Isane tells off Yachiro for hitting somebody that she doesn't know, we have 3 panels of manga that are cut from the anime. They involve Yachiro stating that the individual that she had hit was probably the enemy, and this is followed by Isane continuing to scold her, saying that she shouldn't just hit people based on a hunch. In the manga, this exchange is accompanied by an internal monologue from Guanal, who praises Isane for telling off Yachiro. The anime skips all of this and it just adapts the panel where Yachiro describes that she had a hair-raising feeling when she had seen the individual that she had just hit. After this, we get more cut dialogue from the anime, and it's after Guanal reacts to Yachiro's reasoning for attacking him. 3 subsequent panels of him thinking to himself are cut from the anime here. They involve him deducing that Yachiro attacked him instinctively, as he calls her a wild animal and that he will now hunt her down. The anime instead decides to show Yachiro looking through some belongings in order to find her Zanpakuto, as she explains the feeling of hair-raising to Isane. This scene also has 1 manga panel of redundant dialogue cut from the anime, where Isane asks if this hair-raising feeling she is describing is like getting the chills, likening it to when you have a bad feeling. This is followed by Yachiro reiterating that hair-raising is hair-raising. Understandably, this didn't need to be adapted into the anime, as we continue the trend of cutting to the chase, with Yachiro continuing her explanation in the anime without all of this needless padding. After Guanal lunges at Yachiro to stab her, some more panels of him inner monologuing are cut, where he tells her not to get too cocky by saying that she is going to defeat him. He thinks that she can try to attack him based on instinct, but it won't matter if she is unable to land any attacks on him. We reach the end of material from chapter 571 after Yachiro activates her Shikai Sampo Kenju, and she ends up striking Guanal. Isane's observation of Yachiro's Shikai from chapter 572 has 2 manga panels cut from the anime, where she compares her Shikai to Unohana and Hitsugaya's Zanpakuto, stating that Sampo Kenju is not like Unohana's Zanpakuto, where the sword transforms into a living creature, and it isn't like Hitsugaya's Zanpakuto, where a living creature is manifested via his ice. Before Guanal is attacked by Gremi, half a page of his dialogue is cut from the anime, where he continues to explain details about his powers, clarifying that his existence doesn't actually disappear, but rather he just focuses his spiritual pressure to shift backwards as he evades his enemies at speeds that are faster than their rate of reaction. After Gremi reveals that he has killed Kensei and Rose, Isane's reaction is streamlined in the anime in comparison to the manga, her, where we see her rush to them and confirm that they are in fact dead. The anime instead cuts to Yachiro striking towards Gremi, which she ends up evading. After dodging the attack, a panel is cut from the anime where Gremi asks if she is kidding, because he was able to see her attack from a mile away, stating that he was obviously going to dodge it. When Kinpachi arrives, expressing his disappointment over some kid making a racket after he had sensed Yachiro was in danger, this takes us to the end of manga material from chapter 572 being adapted into the episode. Chapter 573 is pretty faithfully adapted into the anime with little to no changes from the manga. After Kinpachi introduces himself, we see the title of the episode, I Am the Edge, on screen, as we are shown these amazing anime exclusive visuals of Kinpachi's weathered Zanpakuto. The end of chapter 573 brings us to the midpoint of the episode as the battle between Kinpachi and Gremi begins to get serious. The beginning of chapter 574 reveals to us several Shinigami reacting to the spiritual pressure of Kinpachi. These scenes end up being streamlined within the anime, with panels of them cheering Kinpachi's name and exclaiming that they can win the battle now being removed from the anime. When Kinpachi and Gremi are speaking about how the Sternritter was able to heal his wounds, the anime cuts some manga panels of the Shinigami watching them as they make some comments about Kinpachi's spiritual pressure. They question why was it that they were not able to sense Kinpachi's spiritual pressure before Gremi had constructed that tall platform. After Gremi summons his lava, we have some more cut manga material here, where Gremi asks Kinpachi about the lava that he has just created, revealing that he has made it using his own imagination. The anime instead removes this question as it cuts to the panel after this, where Kinpachi states that he doesn't mind illogical things as he swats the lava away. While Kinpachi is suspended in a cube of water, the anime adds an exclusive scene of Yachiro falling into the gap that Gremi creates in the ground. I do like this addition a lot, because after this scene in the manga, Kinpachi is seen to be holding Yachiro and it isn't really shown how he was able to grab her. In the anime, on the other hand, it is apparent that he had rescued her while they were trapped within the ground. After sending the trapped Kinpachi into the crack in the ground, a few manga panels of Gremi explaining his actions are cut from the anime. The cut material includes him commenting on how Kinpachi will hesitate for a moment underwater before he falls into the crack in the ground that he has prepared, then stating that he knows he will not die from being crushed alone, and this is why he had crushed him while he was underwater. The anime removes all of this and just has Gremi say that he will die slowly by being both crushed and underwater, and he plans to trap him within the ground for an hour. The anime once again here is streamlining lines from the manga just to get to the point. With there being so much material to cover in this week's episode, it is understandable that changes like this are being made. After Kinpachi breaks free from the ground, in the manga, a boulder is seen to fire towards Gremi, but he ends up imagining it away. But behind the boulder, Kinpachi suddenly appears. The anime deals with this scene very differently, however, as this brief scene involving the boulder is removed entirely, as we instead cut straight to Kinpachi lunging towards the Sternritter. When Kinpachi comments on Yachiro's bones returning back to normal, we reach the end of manga material from chapter 574. The beginning of chapter 575 is trimmed down quite a lot. In the manga, we actually have an interaction here between Askin and Pepe, where we see Askin observing Gremi and Kinpachi's fight, and he is impressed that Kinpachi is actually battling against Gremi. He asks himself, why did Yuhabak let Gremi out anyway? He is then interrupted by Pepe, who agrees with him, saying that Gremi should have stayed locked up for the rest of his life. Askin then comments on how Pepe is quite the monster himself, to which he corrects him by saying that they are both monsters. Askin then proceeds to get up and leave, as he explains that he is not going to stick around and get caught up in the ridiculous catastrophe that Gremi is about to unleash. Pepe agrees with him again here, saying that they are not safe even at their current distance. Askin adds that Gremi is somebody who can do anything with his imagination, stating that it would be easier to just not have such a power. The anime completely cuts this interaction with Pepe, and it decides to rework a few of his lines from these 3 pages of the manga into this brief scene in the anime. After Yachiro leaves to get healed, 3 panels from the manga are cut. This is where Gremi says that he is surprised that Kinpachi was able to notice that her bones were no longer brittle. Kinpachi states that there is no way that he would have been able to keep his powers going uninterrupted with her. The anime removes this brief exchange, deciding to cut to Kinpachi asking him why is it that he wants to fight. The rest of chapter 575 is adapted one-to-one into the anime, with the material from this chapter wrapping up after Kinpachi tells him that he has made him use his hands. The anime does a fantastic job of adapting Gremmy's lines of internal monologue from the beginning of chapter 576. Honestly speaking, I would take Gremmy's inner monologues over Guana Lee's rambling thoughts, which were considerably trimmed down at the start of the episode. When Grammy begins to imagine himself losing, the anime removes a line of dialogue from the manga, and it's where Kinpachi comments on how he isn't feeling much resistance from Grammy. Instead, the anime cuts to him asking if he has started to imagine that he is losing. Following this, a couple of lines are removed from Grammy after he realizes what is happening. The anime cuts out a line of dialogue where he tells himself that he had almost made his own death a reality. Once again, this is streamlining of the manga material so that we just cut to the chase, because there isn't much time left of the episode and we have just under 3 chapters of material still left to cover. Episode 20 adapts the most amount of manga material out of all of the episodes that we have received thus far. When Grammy reveals that the power of his imagination has been doubled and he ends up summoning a massive meteor, which Kinpachi is more than happy enough to cut down, we wrap up manga material from the end of chapter 576. Now, the beginning of chapter 577 is trimmed down considerably, and I think that this is the most controversial omission from this week's episode. It involves several scenes of different individuals reacting to the meteor falling. In the manga, we see Basby exclaim what on earth Grammy is doing, before we see the soldat, Shinigami and Pepe look up at the sky. Renji is then shown to stare up and ask what is going on, as we then see Askin question if what he is seeing is even possible, as he reaffirms to himself that this is why Grammy should have stayed locked up. In the next panel, we see a Shinigami say that the barrier over the Serite will protect them, because the meteor will be obliterated before it can even enter the barrier. However, they are shocked to learn that it is too big to be destroyed by the barrier, as they then begin to panic and yell that it is coming down and they are going to die. We also see Hashward towards the end of this cut material order a few soldat to rush and protect Yuobak, as we then see the leader of all of the Quincy watching over the battlefield while the meteor falls. Now, instead of all of these amazing reactions from these different groups of people who are essentially reacting to one of the most insane feats that we have ever seen within Bleach, the anime decides to trim down these 5 pages from the manga in order to just show us some Shinigami panicking and yelling that they are going to die. It doesn't really have the same effect in my opinion, but on the other hand, the anime does still do a great job of visually showcasing the meteor with all of the visual effects and animation on display, as it showcases the Serite barrier being destroyed and the truly large scale of the meteor which is about to destroy everything. The flashback of a baby Yachiro approaching Kinpachi has one panel cut from the anime, and it's after Yachiro curiously crawls and places a hand on Kinpachi's zanpakuto. He ends up explaining to her that this is a sword, and he asks if she is afraid of it. The anime cuts these lines of dialogue and instead has Kinpachi ask for her name. Now, the anime really excels in every aspect during the scene where Kinpachi destroys the meteor, as we see it breaking up and scattering into small pieces, followed by the mind-blowing reveal of Kinpachi's Shikai. After Kinpachi showcases his Shikai, the first page of chapter 578 is cut from the anime, and this is where we see the rubble falling from the sky, and Grammy wondering what is going on, as he asks if Kinpachi was really able to destroy the meteor with just a single swing of his blade. The rest of chapter 578 is faithfully adapted into the anime, but at breakneck speeds, as we wrap things up with Grammy's defeat and cut to the outro song. I really didn't like how the anime depicted Grammy's body breaking apart, especially when you compare how Kubo had depicted this within the manga. As you can see, the muscle tendons tearing and the insane detail of the art, with the manga definitely being superior to the anime here. I know that it doesn't need to be one-to-one like the manga, but I would have appreciated if this anime scene was a bit more on model. After the end credits, we have the first 9 pages of chapter 579 adapted into the post-credit scene of the episode, and this is pretty much adapted one-to-one from the manga with little to no changes in the anime. Despite all of the praises that I have had for this episode, with how it got Kinpachi's Shikai right and the scale and visual effects of the meteor, I personally think that it was among some of the weaker episodes from Cour 2. This may be because of a multitude of factors, including my own expectations for this episode being really high, and the insane task that the anime staff had set for themselves by deciding to adapt 8.5 chapters into one episode. The pacing did feel rushed, especially during the last 5 minutes of the episode, which had resulted in Grammy's impactful defeat from from the manga not hitting the same beats in the anime version. I have praised the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime a lot over the past few weeks, so it's only fair that I call out moments where I feel like it really missed the mark. There were concerns going into this episode that it would be too fast paced, with rumours that 8.5 chapters would be adapted into the episode. I didn't want to say too much until I had seen the episode for myself, but now that I have seen it, I think that I have valid reasons to feel like the episode was too fast paced in specific moments, especially the last 5 minutes, and honestly it would have been great if they had spread it out this fight over at least 1.5 episodes. Gremmy's defeat was supposed to make us feel something, but the anime just didn't evoke the same feelings from me that I'd felt while reading the manga. The overall defeat felt really lackluster, and then we get the post-credit scene which had the sad music playing, with Grammy speaking about his mistakes and sharing his final words. And in all honesty, I felt nothing while watching this scene. That's the best way to describe it, and maybe it is my own fault for having my expectations too high. Admittedly, I may have set myself up for failure, because I really was hoping for Grammy vs Kinpachi to be the Yamamoto vs Yhwach fight of Cour 2. I'm not saying that this was a bad episode, but it's just not what I had imagined. Bleach episode 21 adapts a considerable amount of manga material, with several cutscenes, some manga moments that have been reworked and improved upon, and lastly a few anime only scenes that build upon the source material. Now before the intro, we get material previously not adapted from chapter 565, where we see Yhwach waking up from his sleep. Then after the intro, we pick up from where we had left off from the post-credit scene of last week's episode following the defeat of Grammy, as material from the second half of chapter 579 is adapted all the way up until the beginning of chapter 585, when Yhwach states that he will invade the royal palace as we reach the midpoint, which occurs fairly later on into the episode. Now the last 5 minutes of episode 21 adapts the rest of chapter 585 all the way up until the end of chapter 586, and then we cut to the credit song. Now like I had mentioned, there is a lot of streamlining of dialogue, removal of content, and scenes that have been reworked entirely in comparison to the manga that are within this week's episode. It's going to be fascinating to go through all of the differences between the anime and the manga for episode 21, and rest assured I'm going to be covering every cut and change that has been made. As always, I will refrain from talking about any scenes that are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'm only going to be focusing on what has been cut, changed, and added to the anime. Understandably, I have a lot to cover within this video, so without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 21 of Bleach's 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. This episode begins by adapting the end of chapter 565, where we see Yhwach waking up from his sleep. Now this material was not previously adapted into the earlier episodes of Cour 2, and it pretty much involves Yhwach thanking the souls of those who had died up until now, and it is because of their sacrifice that he is able to see the world clearly today. Before this scene from chapter 565 is adapted, we do in fact get to see the Yhwach origin scene from the beginning of episode 14, but it has been sped up considerably, and it has been included in a way to make us think that Yhwach was dreaming about his origins before he had woken up. After the intro song, we begin with adapting material from the second half of chapter 579. Immediately, there are 4 panels of cut manga material of the Shinigami commenting about Grammy's fortress crumbling and how Kinpachi was able to end the fight. The manga shows them celebrating as they say that they will now be able to fight alongside Kinpachi without him getting annoyed about them being in the way. Now this is all removed as we just cut to Kinpachi reacting to Grammy's defeat. Now inconsequential scenes like this from characters commenting on the events that are unfolding are cut throughout this episode, and this has been done in order to properly adapt most of the material from the 7.5 chapters worth of manga content that is adapted into this week's episode. When Candy strikes the area in the manga, she attacks the Shinigami who have just left to search for Yachiru, but in the anime she appears to cut to the chase and strike Kinpachi as the Bambis reveal themselves, bringing us to the end of material that is being adapted from chapter 579. It allows for the order of events from chapter 580 to be adapted differently into the anime. So the anime appears to skip about 5 pages at the start of the chapter, and it cuts straight to Lil Toto speaking to the Shinigami. We see each of the Bambis showcase their abilities as the anime formally introduces each of them to us, along with what letter shrift that they possess. These events are streamlined within the anime, with a lot of inconsequential manga panels not being adapted so that we can quickly move on to the next scene. After Giselle orders the Shinigami to attack themselves, the anime then adapts recaps material from the end of chapter 579, as it combines it with the beginning of chapter 580, where Candice showcases her abilities by electrocuting a group of Shinigami. Now the sequence of events has been altered for the better, I think, as it flows more naturally within the anime, as Kubo and the anime staff have carefully rearranged moments from the manga so that we can be introduced to each of the Bambis and their respective powers. There is one anime only scene here where we see Kinpachi lunge towards Candice to attack her, but he ends up being blindsided by Meninas, who sends him crashing down into the ground. During the manga portion of where this is adapted from, there is no retaliation from Kinpachi after Candice attacks him, and he is instantly attacked by Meninas, and once again the anime does add to the source material here by giving Kinpachi a bit more of a role during his beatdown. In the anime, after Kinpachi is attacked by Candice, he gets back up, as we see an anime exclusive scene of Candice charging up another attack which puts him out of commission. The anime improves on this scene as Kinpachi is convincingly taken out, as we then sync back up to the manga content from the end of chapter 580 with the Bambis commenting on who is going to defeat Kinpachi. The final page of chapter 580 is saved for a bit later on as we cut to content from the next chapter. The anime removes 6 pages from the start of chapter 581 and it involves Omaida, Shinji and Baz B. The scene has Omaida confronted by several soldat while he is carrying Soifon and his younger sister. Suddenly he is assisted by the arrival of Momo and Shinji, who appear and tell Omaida that they need to protect Kinpachi. Shinji explains that there are barely any Shinigami left who are still able to fight. If Kinpachi is killed, then it will turn the tide of battle heavily in favor of the Quincy. Shinji states that they need to stop the Quincy from killing Kinpachi. They are then interrupted by Baz B, who thanks them for their level-headed analysis, stating that he is determined to stop them from saving Kinpachi as he activates Burner Finger 3, transforming the surroundings into lava. Baz tells them to relax because once they are swallowed by the lava, then they will be reduced down to skeletons within seconds, exclaiming that they will die a faster death than Kinpachi. The anime doesn't adapt any of this, which is a real shame, as I really would have liked to see more of Shinji, and this was a scene that I was confident would be adapted into this episode, but alas, because of the high amount of chapters that are adapted into episode 21, scenes like this are left on the cutting room floor. In place of this scene, the anime cuts straight to Rukia and Byakuya sensing a drop in Kinpachi's Reiatsu, as they then sense the arrival of Ichigo into the Serite. The anime does a fantastic job of adapting Ichigo's arrival onto the battlefield, with several individuals reacting to his spiritual pressure which crashes into the Serite. The remix of number 1 that plays throughout this scene was a massive highlight for me, as well as the animation that we see of the hollow mask style smoke cloud which appears after he breaks through the barrier of the Serite. I think that this scene is just truly amazing. With Ichigo telling Kinpachi that he is here to save him, it takes us up to material from the end of chapter 581. A panel from chapter 582 of Lil Toto informing the Bambis that they are facing off against Ichigo Kurosaki, and it is to be expected that they are struggling with him, is cut from the anime. The anime instead streamlines this dialogue as Lil Toto cuts to the chase by having her identify Ichigo as the highest level threat amongst Yhwach's 5 great war powers. After the dust settles from Candice attacking Ichigo with her Galvano blast, the anime cuts 2 panels of the manga where Ichigo says that the Bambis are all alive and kicking, commenting on how he had thought that it would be hard to fight girls, but he is glad that he doesn't have to worry about that. The anime instead cuts to the next page of the manga where the smoke clears and it reveals Ichigo's new outfit now that his cape has been destroyed, with Yhwach telling Hashward and Uryu that it is time and asking on the sideline wondering if he will be chosen or not. It takes us to the end of material adapted from chapter 582. 2 manga panels are cut from the anime involving Candice telling the other Bambis to shut up as she asks them how will they be able to face Yhwach after he learns that Ichigo has made a fool of them. In the next cut panel, Menina says that she doesn't know what she would do, with Lil Toto saying that there is nothing to worry about, and Giselle lastly asking why she is getting so annoyed about this. After Candice clashes with Ichigo, a page from chapter 583 is cut from the anime which has Ichigo ask her about her dual weapons, stating that it's a good thing that he is also wielding 2 blades. Candice retaliates by telling him to shut up as she reveals that she is actually using 6 weapons. Now the anime has some incredible anime exclusive battle sequences between Ichigo and the Bambis. The exclusive sequence begins with Ichigo punching Candice into a nearby building as the other Bambis activate their holy forms and use the ability Sclaverai as they absorb up the nearby reishi to strengthen themselves before they attack Ichigo. The visuals here are amazing, as Giselle, Meninas and Lil Toto really got a lot of limelight within the anime via this exclusive scene. They all clash against Ichigo as we are given enough time for them to showcase their unique abilities in their holy forms, but ultimately they proved to be no match for Ichigo, and I have to say I really enjoyed seeing Meninas and Lil Toto's holy forms the most, with Giselle's admittedly feeling rather disappointing, and I can understand why she doesn't really bother to use a holy form later on in the arc. After the three of them are taken out, we cut back to manga material with Candice appearing and activating a holy form. After the three of them are defeated, we cut back to manga material with Candice appearing and activating a holy form as she strikes Ichigo with her attack Electrocution. Ichigo ends up countering this with his all new ability Getsuga Jujisho, which is yet again another mind-blowing sequence from this episode, as this takes us to the end of material adapted from chapter 583. After Ichigo yells at Candice to dodge his attack, the manga cuts to Yhwach telling Hashua to summon the key as he draws his blade and points it to the sky, as Yhwach thanks the one who has guided them to the light. The anime doesn't adapt this after Ichigo's Getsuga Jujisho. Instead, it reworks this scene to occur after Ichigo is confronted by the 8 Sternritter. The scene involves Yhwach at the start and end of chapter 584, as well as his exchange at the start of chapter 585. All of these moments are streamlined in the anime to have Yhwach thank the one who has guided them to the light, as he says that it is thanks to Ichigo that he is now able to invade the royal palace. Yhwach leaving for the royal palace at the start of chapter 585 is cut down, and it has some of Yhwach's dialogue in the manga given to Mayuri in the anime, who appears during an anime exclusive scene. The manga has Yhwach call out to Ichigo, stating that he knows that he can hear him. He thanks Ichigo, stating that because of him he is able to invade the royal palace. He explains that the robe that he is wearing is called Oken, and that it is created from the bones and hairs of these Soul Division members. In order for Ichigo to force his way through the 72 layers of barriers that exist between the royal palace and the Serete, he had needed to wear the Oken clothing. The clothing had also acted as a form of protection which had defended himself against the friction that would occur by breaking through the 72 barriers. No other clothing material can provide such resistance and protection to its wearer. Yhwach tells him that there is no robe that is better than the Oken clothing, and thanks to its incredible defenses, he was able to break through the 72 barriers, which he reveals remain open for 6,000 seconds. Now, the anime alters the explanation by giving Yhwach's lines here to Mayuri, as he explains about the Oken clothing, the breaking of the 72 barriers, and the 6,000 seconds that the barriers remain open for. This change is understandable, and it keeps us in the loop with the other members of the Gotei 13. Either way, if it was Yhwach or Mayuri who had delivered the news, it doesn't make much of a difference, to be honest. Following Mayuri's explanation, the anime has some more anime exclusive material as we cut to Shunsui commenting on how the enemy's goal has always been the Soul King. We then get a fascinating brief glimpse of Aizen currently in Muken before cutting back to the research and development department, where Mayuri asks what the leader of the Zero Division was thinking. Now, this is in reference to him knowing that Ichigo traveling back would have exposed the royal palace for 6,000 seconds. You may be able to infer that Ichibei for some reason wants Yhwach to come to the royal palace, thus explaining why he had made Ichigo go down the path of Irazu Sando to see if he is a worthy successor to the Soul King. I'm speculating here, but what if the Soul King needs to be replaced? It seems as though there is a plausible theory that the existing Soul King may no longer be able to function, and this is Ichibei's way of having two options to either transform Ichigo or Yhwach into the next Soul King. Now, this hasn't been confirmed, but it does seem like a plausible theory from what the anime appears to be hinting at by showing Ichibei during this particular scene, as it makes it apparent that he is in fact hiding something from us. The anime has an exclusive scene of Meninas using her ability Diamond Push, which sends Ichigo hurtling through the air. The anime then cuts a few panels from the manga where the Sternritter Nanana attempts to intercept Ichigo, but he ultimately fails as he avoids his attack. Instead, we cut straight to the next set of panels where Robert appears and holds a spirit gun against Ichigo's head. The anime then cuts a comedic interaction between Ichigo and Renji after Renji appears and defends Ichigo from Baz B's Burner Finger 1. In the manga, he complains to Renji that he almost cut his neck with that attack, but Renji tells him to stop whining, telling him at least he didn't get hit. All of this is streamlined in order to cut to Renji just telling Ichigo to go on ahead. With the Shinigami arriving to confront the Sternritter, we reach the end of material adapted from chapter 585. The last 2 minutes of the episode is spent adapting chapter 686 as we begin by cutting the first 7 pages of the chapter, which I am assuming will be adapted into a later episode. It involves Baz B counting the number of Shinigami who have appeared to challenge them, as he notes that there are only 6 of them and it's not enough for a one-on-one fight against the 8 Sternritter. After Baz learns that there are no special war powers amongst them, he gets ready to fire at all of them, but he is attacked by Ikkaku. When he attempts to retaliate, his bow is then frozen by Rukia, who reminds him that they will not let him pass. Ikkaku reaffirms that the only way through is over their dead bodies. Refusing to let Ichigo get away, Lil Toto suggests that they all activate their holy forms as they intend to make quick work out of the Shinigami. We then end up seeing the two groups charge towards each other in this amazing manga double spread. Now again, this wasn't adapted into this week's episode, but I do think that it will be included within episode 22. Now the anime instead shows us Ichigo rushing towards Yhwach, Hashward and Uryu, and things play out very similarly to the manga, with the differences occurring after Chad and Orihime appear. In the anime, Ichigo is actually struck by 2 of Uryu's arrows, one across the face and one on the abdomen. This is until Chad arrives and appears in front of him to protect Ichigo with his shield arm, as Uryu's ability Licked Regen rains arrows down upon them. Orihime also appears in front of both Chad and Ichigo as she summons a shield to defend them against the attacks. Now it is a minor alteration, but it adds to the impact of the scene by having Orihime and Chad involved, as it further cements the shock of Uryu's betrayal. The manga on the other hand has Ichigo assisted from afar by Orihime, who summons a shield in front of him to defend him against the arrows that are raining down on him. The anime gives Ichigo a few additional lines of dialogue as he demands an answer from Uryu, telling him to say something. Aside from this, things play out very similarly to the manga, with the incredible music and voice acting elevating the source material, as the episode ends with Uryu leaving with Hashward and Yhwach in order to make their arrival within the royal palace. Bleach episode 22 slows down the breakneck pacing that we've had from the last couple of episodes, where 8 or even 7 chapters had been adapted into one episode. Thankfully, this week we have less than 5 chapters adapted. Now there are several anime exclusive scenes this week, with several minor omissions and some scenes that haven't been adapted but saved for later episodes. But for the most part, this was a very strong episode which remains faithful to the manga material. Before the intro song, we have some of chapter 587 adapted as we continue with Ichigo and company reacting to Uryu leaving with Yhwach. After the intro, we get a couple of new anime exclusive scenes, the first featuring Byakuya and the second catching up with Komamura. The first half of the episode adapts up until the beginning of chapter 590, and the second half adapts until the end of chapter 592. Like I mentioned, some scenes are not adapted so that they can include them into later episodes, but for the most part, a lot of stuff has been retained from the manga, even including comedic moments. Speaking of comedic moments, there was one big omission which I am not sure how fans will feel about, but I'll be talking about it in greater detail within the video. Rest assured, I'm going to be going over every cut, change and addition that has been made, and as always, I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes which are one-to-one adapted from the manga, and I'm only going to be focusing on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. Understandably, there is a lot to cover, so without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 22 of Bleach's 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. The episode begins by adapting the first half of chapter 587 before the intro song. During this sequence, we get a brief anime-only scene where Shunsui reacts to Hashward, Uryu and Yhwach leaving for the royal palace. His new lines of dialogue build upon the new scenes in the anime where Shunsui expresses his doubt about Ichibe's true intentions. He asks why Yhwach didn't just shoot down the royal palace, as he then asks if they are going to be welcomed to the royal palace instead, as he refers to Ichibe as the high priest and asks if everything is going according to his plan, confirming my theory from earlier episodes that Ichibe had planned for Yhwach to make his way to the royal palace. We then return to Ichigo and the others with some comedic moments being cut from the anime where Chad throws Ichigo to get him to snap out of his funk. Instead, the anime skips this page and has Chad speaking to him about how they are also just as shocked about Uryu and he must have had his reasons for joining the other side. The anime gives some new lines of dialogue to Ichigo here that are not in the manga. After he tells Chad that he is right, he says that ever since the start of the battle against the Quincy, he has been thinking about this, wondering if this was going to be a battle between the Shinigami and the Quincy, then what would this mean for him and Uryu, who will be on opposing sides. The anime does a fantastic job of showing us past sequences of Uryu helping helping Ichigo and the others, really setting the emotional tone here, with Ichigo saying despite everything they have always been fighting side by side for a long time, and regardless of whatever they have just seen, Ichigo affirms that Uryu is still their friend. He states that he doesn't know what Uryu is thinking, as Chad says that they have decided what they are going to do nonetheless, as we cut back to manga material with Ichigo saying that they will chase Uryu down and ask him why he is with Yhwach, and if he doesn't give them a good enough reason, then they will just smack him and bring him back. Now following this, we cut to the intro song as the episode then begins. The episode begins by adapting the first half of chapter 587 before the intro song. Surprisingly, we get another anime exclusive scene here as we kick things off with Byakuya being confronted by the three Sternritter Nanana, Candice and Robert, as Byakuya wonders wasn't it the aim of the Quincy to destroy the Serite, as he watches Yhwach and company leave for the royal palace, thinking what on earth are they planning to do. Nanana appears reminding him that they are not dead yet, with Candice emerging asking where Ichigo has gone, before Robert also arrives to surround Byakuya. Hopefully we will get to see Byakuya have some extended sequences here, as I would love to see him take part in an anime exclusive 3 vs 1 battle hopefully next week or the week after. Immediately following this, we see Iba and Komamura, who if you recall had transformed into a wolf following the humanization technique which he had used to defeat Bambietta. Komamura in his beast form continues walking to the Quincy fortress in this anime exclusive scene. During this moment, Iba is seen asking if his captain can lend him a hand, and Best Boy Komamura gets back up on his paws and continues walking. Now this highlights that Komamura can still somewhat understand what is being said to him, but he is unable to respond. This was confirmed within Can't Fear Your Own World, but it's nice to have confirmation of this here within the anime too, as Iba wonders if Komamura agrees to what he has just said and how much of the words that he says he can understand. So following this, we cut back to manga material from chapter 587, and it continues from what we had seen from the start of the episode, where we see Renji protecting Rukia from a massive boulder. Now this ties together perfectly with the manga content which immediately follows it, where Renji asks Rukia if she is okay before they're confronted by Baz B. Chapter 587 ends with Yhwach, Uryu and Hashwad arriving at the royal palace, but episode 22 doesn't adapt this, as instead the last material that we see from this chapter is the blast following Baz B activating Burner Finger 4. So continuing with the rearrangement of scenes, the first half of episode 588 is also not adapted into this week's episode. The cut manga material showcases the arrival of Yhwach and company within the royal palace, as the members of the Zero Division react to that arrival, with Yhwach summoning the Soldat to begin the invasion. However, they are quickly confronted by Korinji, who briefly showcases his ability to use his hot spring water to eliminate the Soldat, before he then charges towards Yhwach. Again, none of this is adapted into episode 22, and I am assuming that they will save this for the end of episode 23 or even for episode 24. So instead of these scenes involving Yhwach, we instead cut to the midpoint of chapter 588, where we see Giselle being confronted by Ikkaku and Yumichika. The remainder of chapter 588 was faithfully adapted into the anime, and they have even left in Yumichika's comments about Giselle, which I honestly thought were going to be removed from this week's episode. I don't doubt that there will be some upset Twitter users about this, but I for one am glad that comedic scenes like this were left intact. When we cut back to Ichigo and the others, as Urahara prepares to fire them to the royal palace with a cannon built under the Squad 12 barracks, we get some new lines of dialogue during the conversation at the start of chapter 589. In an anime exclusive exchange, Ichigo asks if anyone else will be coming with them, but Urahara says that the other captains are still preoccupied with the Sternritter that are still in the Serite. Orihime also has some new lines of dialogue added here which fleshes out the scene more, like asking about how the cannon is going to fire them, but then Akon appears to tell Urahara that Yoriichi has returned. Now before Yoriichi appears, there are in fact 3.5 pages worth of manga content that are cut from the anime, which is a comedic scene where Chad asks Ichigo about Orihime's outfit. He embarrassingly says that he thinks that she is revealing too much, before Orihime freaks out, worrying that Ichigo is going to think that she is some sort of a freak. He then learns that it was Urahara's decision to make Orihime wear the outfit, as he had convinced her that Ichigo would like her wearing something like this. They are then interrupted by Yoriichi, who abruptly cuts into the scene in a very unique manner, as then the rest of the scene has her scolding Ichigo and telling him what he should have said to Orihime instead. Now all of this is omitted as the anime cuts straight to business, with Urahara telling Akon to move on to the next step of the plan before he welcomes Yoriichi back, asking if she was successful with her mission. We then learn that she's been collecting energy from distortions that have appeared at the boundary of the world of the living during the Quincy invasion of the Soul Society. Urahara believes that the distortion was created to cause confusion confusion amongst the Shinigami and to divide up their forces. But through Yoriichi's investigation, they had discovered that a large amount of energy is created the moment that the distortion appears and the moment that it disappears. This energy is large enough to connect the two worlds. Now this scene is expanded within the anime to include new lines from Hiyori and the Vizards, as well as Yoriichi being more involved in the conversation too. The manga just had Urahara explaining the situation to Ichigo and the others, but the anime does a better job to explain the distortions here. This makes up for the cutscenes from way back in episode 1, where we see Hiyori spot a distortion while she is walking. Also, this entire moment involves everyone instead of it being an explanation dump from Urahara, as it also includes Yoriichi complaining at the end about Urahara. The first half of the episode adapts up to the start of chapter 590 after Mayuri asks Giselle if she knows that great people are often seen to be shining, as she responds that she wasn't asking about why he was shining, as we then cut to the mid-card. The rest of chapter 590 is adapted faithfully into the anime, with the appearance of the resurrected Arrancar marking the end of material from chapter 590. Half a page of manga material is not adapted from chapter 591, and it's where the resurrected Arrancar are being electrocuted, and each of them react, with Dordoni saying that he is already trying to kill them, Saruchi yelling that she knew that they couldn't trust him, and lastly Luffy whining that he didn't even say anything. Mayuri reassures them that there will be no adverse effects to their body after they have been electrocuted, because he is simply sending an electrical impulse into their brain which stimulates the pain receptors in the brain, as Dordoni says that this is actually worse than being electrocuted. The anime instead cuts to the chase here, with Mayuri saying that he is pleased that the resurrected Arrancar turned out to be more durable than he had anticipated. Episode 22 ends by adapting all the way up until the end of chapter 591, as we see Giselle summon a zombified Hitsugaya to her aid. Unlike episode 21, this week's episode ended with a poem for episode 23, which is titled Marching Out the Zombies 2. My prediction that they will be adapting 5 or less chapters per episode from now on appears to be correct so far. I do hope that they continue with this pacing, because there were several anime exclusive scenes in this episode, along with scenes that flesh out the manga material by giving other characters some additional lines and overall building upon the source material in a positive manner. So much happened this week, as we had new anime only scenes involving Shunsui, Byakuya and Komomura, as well as a lot of the comedic moments being retained within the anime, and we also got to see the Vizards make an appearance, which is always a good thing in my opinion. So what were your thoughts on episode 22 Marching Out the Zombies? I know that it was an episode that spent a fair bit of time setting the stage for the next major battles that are about to unfold, but I still think that it was an overall strong episode that was well paced and had me glued to the screen. There was a fair bit of anime exclusive scenes here, surprisingly a lot of comedic relief and some scenes which they are clearly saving for later as Yhwach and company make their big arrival to the royal palace. I really loved seeing more of the sequences between Mayuri and Giselle, and I thought that they were all really well animated, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what zombified Hitsugaya will bring to the table next week. Bleach episode 23, titled Marching Out the Zombies 2, continues on from last week, as we have yet another well-paced episode which adapts over 5 chapters worth of manga material. There are some anime exclusive scenes here, with minor omissions and some content that wasn't adapted from earlier episodes appearing in this week's installment of Bleach. I really enjoyed the anime exclusive scene this week, as we get to see a battle between Byakuya and 3 Sternritter which had occurred off-screen within the manga, and in general we had a very well-paced episode which very faithfully adapted the manga content. The episode begins with a scene before the intro which adapts material from chapter 592, as we continue with where we had left off from last week, with zombified Hitsugaya appearing onto the battlefield. After the intro song, we begin with material from chapter 593 where Byakuya begins his battle against Hitsugaya. The first half of the episode adapts material until the midpoint of chapter 594. The second half begins with anime exclusive content mixed in with material from chapter 594, as we adapt all the way up until the first 3 pages of chapter 597, where we see Lil Toto kill Pepe. This week's installment does have a post-credit scene which adapts material from the start of chapter 588, and it showcases Yhwach, Hashwad and Uryu arriving within the royal palace. So in total, we have content from chapter 592 to the first 3 pages of 597 within the episode. Material from chapter 588 is also also adapted into the post-credit scene, which gives us over 5 chapters worth of manga material included within episode 23. There is a lot to discuss for this week's installment, but rest assured that I'll cover every cut, change and addition that has been made, and as always, I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes which are one-to-one adaptations from the manga, and I'm going to solely focus on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. So with so much to cover, without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 23 of Bleach's 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. The episode begins with a scene before the intro which adapts all of chapter 592. The chapter is adapted faithfully over the span of this 3-minute segment, aside from a panel of dialogue that is cut from the anime. This is where Mayuri compares zombified Hitsugaya to zombified Bambietta, stating that Bambietta still has a mind of her own in comparison to Hitsugaya, who doesn't. The anime streamlines this moment and just has Mayuri say that he must have been transformed into a zombie before he was dead. We cut to the opening song after Mayuri states that he has many drugs that he would like to test on Hitsugaya. After the opening song, the anime adapts material from chapter 593 as Mayuri and zombified Hitsugaya begin their battle. This chapter is very faithfully adapted into the anime, and honestly it was just really entertaining to watch everything unfold, with Mayuri's voice actor elevating the dialogue with his incredible delivery, and not to mention the amazing art and animation which builds upon the manga material. Material from chapter 593 wraps up after Mayuri stabs Hitsugaya with his Zanbakudo. Now we cut to the mid-card after zombified Kensei, Rose and Rangiku appear as Mayuri sends out his resurrected Arrancar to deal with them. The highlight of episode 23 has to be the anime exclusive material in the second half of the episode, featuring Byakuya battling against the Sternritters, Robert, Candice and Nanana. This was a fight that occurred off-screen within the manga, but thankfully the anime takes some time to flesh out the manga material as we get to see the abilities of each of the Sternritter, in particular Nanana and Robert, who are severely underutilized within the manga. After Byakuya clashes with each of them, he takes on Nanana and then Candice, as he leaves Robert for last, who uses Sclaverai in order to gather Reishi to activate his holy form called God Step, as he moves with incredible speed, charging towards Byakuya as he fires a bullet towards him. But Byakuya surprisingly activates his Bankai, which shreds through Robert and his attack, effortlessly defeating the Sternritter. Now following this, we cut back to manga material from chapter 594. We wrap up content from chapter 594 after Pepe uses his ability on Meninas, who punches Lil Toto as he tells her not to fight for him just because she loves him. Pepe's dialogue from the start of chapter 595 is streamlined within the anime as we get a few panels cut from the manga where he is yapping away about battles being for the sake of love, how they occur because of love for one's wife, child, parent, for example. This monologuing is thankfully cut short as we cut to the chase with Pepe exclaiming why battles are beautiful, before Byakuya takes out Hisagi and sets his sights on the Sternritter. The anime cuts out Pepe repeatedly saying I'm scared when his heart-shaped projection chases after Byakuya. The anime cuts 2 lines of internal monologue from Byakuya while he clashes against Hisagi. In the manga, he thinks that if he uses Kido he may kill Hisagi, and he states that if it was his arm that was being controlled by Pepe's power, then he would have no issue with cutting it off. These lines are not in the anime, which helps to just streamline the scene overall. We reach the end of manga material from chapter 595 after Kensei and Rose appear and knock out Pepe. Chapter 596 is very faithfully adapted into the episode, with little to no changes between the anime and the manga, with Lil Toto appearing before the defeated Pepe, concluding the content from this chapter. This week's episode ends after adapting the first 3 pages of chapter 597, where we see Lil Toto take revenge by killing Pepe, with the episode cutting to the end credits. Now make sure you stick around until after the ending song, because we see material from the first few pages of chapter 588, which adapts Yuhobak, Hashwad and Uryu's arrival within the royal palace, as Yuhobak states so this is the royal palace before the episode ends. This week's episode saw the defeat of 5 Sternritter, with Byakuya impressively taking out Candice, Robert and Nanana, while Mayuri defeated Giselle and surprisingly came to the rescue to help Byakuya by using the zombified Shinigami to defeat Pepe. Episode 23 was probably the most faithfully adapted episode within Cour 2, with very minor omissions and changes overall. Now while doing an amazing job of adapting the manga, we also had an amazing anime exclusive battle with Byakuya fighting against the 3 Sternritter. Enough time was given to make this feel like a believable encounter, with each of the Sternritter getting a chance to showcase their powers as they clash against Byakuya before he swiftly takes them out. This episode covers the remainder of Mayuri's clash against Giselle, whilst also squeezing in Pepe's fight fight before the two scenarios converge, leading to the end of the episode. The post-credit scene this week was a massive teaser for what's to come, because now that we have wrapped up with almost all of the battles between the Shinigami and the Sternritter that are going on in the Serete, it's now time to focus on the next phase of Yhwach's plan as he invades the royal palace. I am beyond excited to see how the last 3 episodes of cour will turn out. Hopefully the anime continues to adapt material at this pacing, because they are finding time to include at least 2 to 3 minutes worth of anime exclusive material into each episode, which is adapting about 5 chapters worth of manga material. So what were your thoughts on episode 23, Marching Out the Zombies 2? Personally, I really enjoyed this week's episode, and I loved how faithfully it had adapted the manga while still finding time to include a new fight scene. The pacing for this week was amazing, as we receive yet another very strong episode that I don't think many people will have much to criticize about. The story will be taking a major turn for the rest of cour and the remainder of the 1000-Year Blood War arc as we wrap up the second Quincy invasion and begin Yhwach's invasion of the royal palace. We have all of this to look forward to as we quickly approach the finale of cour. Bleach episode 24, titled Too Early to Win, Too Late to Know, is finally here, as the pace really picks up as we begin the next portion of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, as we switch from the conflict within the Serete to focusing on the battles going on in the royal palace. Most of the material within this episode adapts content from chapters 597 to 601, with several notable additions and rearrangements made to the order of events. This episode is special, and there is no other way to describe it. I wouldn't hesitate to say that it's so far my favorite episode of cour. This week's episode has several anime exclusive scenes, moments that have been rearranged as well as outright changed from what occurs within the manga, in order to give us a superior new version of events which really improves upon the manga. We begin with an amazing 4-minute anime exclusive scene which reveals a never before seen conversation between Yhwach and Ichibei, which takes place 1000 years ago, before Yhwach had originally invaded the Soul Society. This was a jaw-dropping way to begin, and it totally reminds me of episode 7 from cour 1, which had started with that insane flashback of the original Gotei 13. Now the first half of this episode covers material from chapter 597 to 599, with there being very notable changes, including an anime exclusive scene of Ichigo and the others discussing the purpose of Yhwach while they are traveling to the royal palace. The second half of the episode adapts material from chapter 600 to 601, with the final scene being adapted from chapter 604. As you can tell, there is a lot of reworking of the manga content going on. Over the last 23 episodes of Bleach, we have had several anime exclusive scenes. The anime staff have really done their very best to reveal to us moments that have occurred off screen as well as extending fight scenes, but this week's episode has set a precedent, because for the very first time we are actually getting a change to the manga material unlike any of the episodes before it. The order of events and how they unfold has been changed in comparison to the manga, as well as all new scenes being sprinkled in between. Now these new scenes flesh out the manga content featuring the Zero Division, which had left fans feeling disappointed when these chapters had first released. The end result is a totally new version of events which both anime only and manga readers will be able to thoroughly enjoy, and hopefully it will live up to all of our expectations. There is an insane amount of stuff to cover in this video, so rest assured that I'll be covering every single cut, change and addition that has been made, and I'm going to be refraining from talking about any scenes that are one-to-one adapted from the manga, as I'll solely be focusing on the changes that the anime makes. So without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 24 of Bleach's 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. The episode begins with an amazing surprise via a 4-minute anime exclusive scene taking us approximately 1000 years into the past, presumably before Yhwach's first assault on the Soul Society, where he was defeated by the original Gotei 13. He is sat across a long table within Silburn, with Ichibei at the other end. Ichibei speaks with Yhwach about the purpose of the Shinigami and how they balance the 3 realms of the Soul Society, Wakamundo, and the world of the living. The purpose of the conversation is about a pact of trust between the Soul Society and Yhwach's Empire of Light. As the two are discussing the terms of this agreement, Ichibei tells Yhwach to leave the control of the 3 realms to the Shinigami, so that Yhwach can continue to enjoy ruling over his empire. He moves on to discuss the unification of the Quincy, which are the Quincy who follow Yhwach within his Empire of Light, and the traditional Quincy, like Soka and Ishida, who don't divert from the old ways of the Quincy. Ichibei reveals that he is unaware of any attempt of the Empire of Light attempting to unify these 2 groups, so it may not be wise to make an oath under these circumstances. Yhwach says that this is questionable, asking if Ichibei thinks of him as some ignorant child who doesn't know. Ichibei says that he didn't mean to belittle
belittle him, but it is true that Yhwach doesn't know much. Yuha then speaks about how long ago reality had consisted of only one world. There was no such thing as death or an afterlife. He then asks who was it that had disrupted the eternal peace of the world by separating both life and death. Ichibei says that it was the Soul King. As Yhwach then asks who had brought the fear of death upon people, Ichibei once again states that it was the Soul King. Yhwach then explains that he can hear the anguish of the souls that return to him, the desperate cries of the people who are afraid of death and they cling on to their lives. He wonders if he will now still respond to him with these same words as he addresses him by his full name. Ichibei tells him not to say his name so casually, as Yhwach begins to gather reishi as he asks where is their peace within the three realms. He then opens his eyes, revealing there to be two irises, which indicates that he has activated a weaker form of the Almighty because it has two irises instead of the three that we see later on in the story. Both of them resolutely yell at each other, "Let me show you," as Ichibei raises his hand towards Yhwach while he defends himself from an attack from a random Quincy girl who is also present at the meeting, along with Zedritz, Hubert and Algor. Within Ichibei's hand an eye appears with two irises inside it. He uses this to show Yhwach the true history of the world. Similar to how Ichigo was shown it within Irazu Sando, we see a sequence of images that flash before the screen. Now some of these we have seen before, but there is one new still image of Ichibei holding the dismembered body of the Soul King, revealing that he was present when the Soul King as we know him today was first formed. Yhwach witnesses all of this in shock as Ichibei tells him that he didn't know about this, explaining that together with the Soul King they are preserving this dangerous reality. After being shown these images, Yhwach appears to be riled up, disappointingly saying how sad as he calls him pathetic. Appearing in front of him, he grabs his arms as he reveals that he could already see it, as he then asks if he really thinks that he can kill him with these hands. Ichibei comments on the change of Yhwach's eyes, stating that they are troublesome. He reveals that Yhwach cannot see farther than the Soul King. Then an oversized hand appears which resembles Pernida as it towers over Yhwach, with the eye staring down at him as it grabs him and then disappears. This may have been Ichibei deactivating Yhwach's the Almighty, as Yhwach reacts surprised, wondering what has he done. Ichibei then gets up to leave, and while walking away he tells him that until he dies his eyes will never open again, advising him to live humbly from now on. After Ichibei leaves, Yhwach speaks about the state of his eyes, commenting on how it is better for him to live without knowing about what will happen in the future. He refers to the Soul King as his father, stating that he has lost his limbs and has become a hideous lump of flesh that the world worships now. He refuses to allow things to remain as they are, stating that he will give the Soul King a better role, revealing that the Soul King must disappear in order to restore reality to how it once was. But he will ensure that the Soul King becomes a grave marker for the three realms, which will be destroyed as a result of his new ambition. I had to break this down line by line because it is just insane that this has been shown to us. This is content straight out of Can't Be Your Own World, and we learn so much about the nature of reality, how Yhwach was like 1000 years ago, and most importantly, just how sinister Ichibei has always been. This scene was really needed within the manga, and I'm really glad that it was included here, as it also serves to reveal to us that Ichibei had nerfed Yhwach by sealing his Shrift ability, which was a massive handicap for him going into his battle against the original Gotei 13. Following the flashback where we see a discussion between Yhwach and Ichibei, we cut to the present day where Yhwach, Hashward and Uryu appear within the royal palace as we begin to adapt material from the start of chapter 588. The first 6 pages are adapted into the pre-intro segment with a couple of new lines of dialogue. After telling Hashward to begin, in the anime he also states that they will end this world full of fear, and with their own hands they will create a new world which has eternal peace. After this, Hashward summons the Sword Art, and in the anime Senjumaru appears to confront them, but in the manga we have Korinji appear instead. Senjumaru appearing is taken straight from the end of chapter 597, as we then cut to the intro song. Now this is the first indication that the sequence of events are not only being rearranged, but this episode has changed how scenes unfold within the manga. Of course, this is exactly what myself and other fans were wanting from the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime, ever since it was first announced. And to now see the anime staff giving us all new material which extends the rushed pacing of the manga is literally a dream come true. After the opening song, the episode begins with material from the end of chapter 598 where we see Ganju rush to join Ichigo and the others just as Urahara is about to fire them into the sky. Now the manga does have a couple of pages worth of material from the end of chapter 597 that occurs before this, which has been cut from the anime. This comedic scene involves the cannon appearing from the ground as Urahara plays loud music that irritates Ichigo as he begins to count down to them finally launching. The comedic banter between Ganju and Ichigo is trimmed down within the anime, because in the manga, Ichigo actually jokes around with him, saying doesn't he have anything better to do. The anime skips over their small squabble as Ganju begins explaining about how they helped the Zero Division to return to the Royal Palace. This exchange is extended in the manga as Ganju explains about how he has to come with them because he has the roadmap to the Royal Palace, and that you cannot get to the Royal Palace without it. We see Ichigo checking if this is true with Urahara, as he tells him that he has already accounted for this. Now this is altered in the anime as Ganju briefly mentions the map before Ichigo cuts to the chase, asking if Ganju is sure about joining them. After Ichigo and the others are fired into the sky, the anime shows us an exclusive scene where we see several reactions from people in the Serete like Byakuya, Renji, Rukia, Bazbi, and even a defeated Robert. We get a few new lines of dialogue from Mairi here also, who is seen to be observing the successful launch as he criticizes the unsightly upward trajectory of the rocket, complaining about the launch appearing to lack coordination. Following this, we cut back to the Royal Palace with material from chapter 597 as Senjumaru states that it's been a long time since she had last seen Yhwach. When Hashwad orders the Soldat to attack, Senjumaru has the royal soldiers charge and defeat the Soldat, and it seems as though Senjumaru has taken the place of Kurinji here, because in a similar manner Kurinji had taken out several Soldat within the manga. So things are being swapped around here, and following this clash we sync back up with chapter 597 where Yhwach begins walking towards Senjumaru. Now the only difference here is that in the manga Yhwach actually walks past Senjumaru, and it's a really dramatic moment, but unfortunately we don't get this in the anime, which is probably one downside of rearranging these scenes here. So in the manga he actually walks past her and then the royal soldiers surround him, but in the anime he takes a few steps forward before the royal soldiers charge in. So following this, the anime cuts to content from chapter 598 where Nyanzol introduces himself properly and he explains his Shrift ability. The rest of chapter 598 is adapted into the episode until the end where Nyanzol is defeated by Senjumaru. We then cut back to Ichigo and the others and we get an anime exclusive scene here which builds upon 3 pages of content from chapter 598 that have been rearranged and slotted here. The anime exclusive stuff features Ganju mid-conversation stating that the situation is a mess and that for some reason he had thought that the Shinigami would win. He comments on why the enemy had built a castle within the Serete and then decided to discard it and head for the Royal Palace instead, as he wonders what Yhwach is planning on doing. Chad then asks about what is in the Royal Palace, but Ganju reveals that he doesn't know because he hasn't been there. Orihime adds that Ganju said that he knows the Royal Palace better than anyone else, as he then explains that his sister had told him a lot of things, but they were minor details that aren't of much use to their current situation. Yoriichi adds to the conversation, stating that they are after the Soul King. She explains that the Soul King is the ruler of the world of the living, Hueco Mundo, and the Soul Society. She has only ever heard about him and has never met him. Chad adds to the conversation with maybe his most important contribution in the entire story, that maybe Yhwach is trying to replace the Soul King, to which Ganju explains that this has to be it. Ichigo then wonders if it is even possible to take the place of the Soul King. He states that he had seen a lot of things while he was training at the Royal Palace, and that the Soul King is the originator of the worlds. He then goes on to say that he doesn't think that he can be replaced. Regardless of whatever Yhwach's motive is, Ganju states that now they have come this far, they have to just defeat the enemy. This then cuts to manga content from chapter 598 where Orihime reminisces on how the situation reminds her of when they went to rescue Rukia, and this then wraps up the rearranged material from chapter 598. While they reminisce about Uryu, we do get an anime original shot of Uryu staring off into the distance, but he appears to be doing something that is causing his Quincy medallion to light up. We even see the patterns of Blutveen appear across his eyeball. This brief shot foreshadows something that happens right at the end of the episode. We then cut back to the Royal Palace with material from chapter 599 as we continue with Senjumaru's confrontation with Yhwach. The manga here has Yhwach summon more Soldat to battle his soldiers, as well as summoning the Schutzstaffel. The anime on the other hand only shows him summoning the latter. During his introduction, the anime gives Lil Barrow a new line of dialogue, as he says the answer has already been given. The rest of chapter 599 is adapted into the episode very faithfully, with the anime really building upon the source material, with Lil shooting Senjumaru as we then cut to the mid-card of the episode. The anime then cuts some panels from the manga from chapter 600 where Gerard scolds Lil for making a mess on Yhwach's path, as Lil then asks Pernida for help. The anime cuts this exchange as we just see Pernida begin to contort Senjumaru's body into a ball. Now after After Kiryu explains how a cage works, Kurinji makes his appearance, as he, along with Senjumaru and Kiryu, formally introduce themselves in this anime-only sequence. Then the best is saved for last as Nimaya appears with the spotlight on him as he introduces himself as the #1 Zanpakuto creator. This is very different in comparison to the manga because Kurinji is already there, so he doesn't really introduce himself again with the other members. And we just get a brief scene where we cut to Nimaya appearing onto the battlefield and introducing himself. Now I do like how the anime is handling things, as I think that they are giving the Zero Division a lot more respect than what they had received within the manga. After Nimaya introduces himself, we end with material from chapter 600. Nimaya's battle with Gerard begins as we adapt material from the start of chapter 601. The anime faithfully adapts chapter 601 until the point where Nimaya thanks Yhwach for invading the royal palace because it had given him a chance to use his Zanpakuto Sayabushi, a sword so sharp that it cannot be sheathed. We then cut to an anime exclusive scene here where Yhwach throws a medallion that he pulls from inside of his cape across the air and through Kiryu's cage as he teleports out of the trap. The medallion then drops to the ground. We then see a mysterious shot of Uryu, which combined with the last brief shot of him with his medallion glowing honestly highlights to me that he has just used his Shrift ability, the Antithesis, in order to allow Yhwach to escape. This then allows the anime to skip from chapter 601 all the way to the end of chapter 604 where Yhwach finally confronts Ichibei. Now the anime does include an exclusive scene here which sets the stage for the last 2 episodes of cour 2. Ichibei tells Yhwach that it is quite the feat to have the strength to get past Kiryu's cage. Nimaya doesn't seem to be too bothered, stating that this is to be expected from the king, complimenting how he is brilliantly rising. This is literally something that only Nimaya would say. We then cut to the inside of the cage as Hashward asks if they are not going after his majesty. Kurinji responds by saying that they are the ones who need to be going after Yhwach because even its hot spring water isn't strong enough to get rid of the smell of Ichibei. This is a pretty funny backhanded compliment which is typical of Kurinji's style. Returning to Ichibei, he tells Kurinji not to say whatever he wants just because he is far away. Yhwach, not bothered about his banter, asks if he is going to allow him to pass. After addressing him by his full name, we then cut back to material from the end of chapter 604 as the episode ends with Ichibei telling Yhwach not to blame him if he loses his voice over casually saying his name. I'm confident that next week when we have episode 25 and 26 drop at the same time, we will see an expansion upon the material within chapters 602 to 604, giving the Zero Division a proper battle against Uryu and Hashward now that the Shootstaffel have been defeated. The alterations that have been made to the anime within the last few minutes of this week's episode have massive implications for the anime, because this means that Yhwach doesn't do Ashwaulen to revive the Shootstaffel and he leaves the Shootstaffel defeated, as now Uryu and Hashward have to deal with the Zero Division. The manga had some backlash for off-screening the Zero Division fights, but this means that the anime is going to be fully showing them and they will be taking place during Ichibei vs Yhwach. Now the biggest change between the anime and the manga is that Nimaya was actually defeated before Yhwach had went on to confront Ichibei, so this definitely gives us something new to look forward to. Now there isn't any post-credit scene within this episode as we cut straight to the poem for episode 25, which wraps up this week's installment of Bleach. I think that this episode has given us a solid indication of what we can expect from cour 3 and 4. It's safe to say that we have all predicted that cour 2 will be ending near chapter 611. This means that we have around 76 chapters worth of content that needs to be adapted across the 2 remaining cours, which is more than 38 chapters per cour. The current pacing of cour 1 and 2, they have been adapting 70 chapters worth of material over 13 episodes, leaving little room for anime only scenes, but despite this, we have still had a fair few new additions being made to the anime. I want you to think about just how much they will be adding to cour 3 and 4. It is going to be totally insane, and these last 26 episodes of Bleach will be very different to what we have received thus far. We can estimate that half of the material in cour 3 and 4 is going to be stuff that we have never seen before, which will expand upon the manga. It is going to be really wild to witness it. I've said all of this because episode 24 is a sign of what's to come. The episode changed around events, added new scenes, and made for an entirely new experience. This is something that anime only fans and manga readers can go into blindly and enjoy equally as much. Well, that was episode 24, Too Early to Win, Too Late to Know. It was obvious during my breakdown that I really enjoyed this episode, because ever since the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime was first announced, I'd been waiting for major additions and changes to be made in order to flesh out the weaker aspects of the story. The remaining manga material that we have left to adapt had suffered from rushed pacing and a lot of off-screened moments. However, we have a solid foundation that has been established within this episode that proves that the finale of Cour 2 will expand upon the Zero Division battles, as well as provide us with more context behind Ichibe's battle against Yhwach. This week we had the amazing flashback scene at the start of the episode. We had the rearrangement of events so that each of the Zero Division members have their time to shine within the anime, and we have all new dialogue scattered across the episode, including Ichigo and the others talking about the Soul King and Yhwach's motive. The major addition that this episode makes is to establish Yhwach's fear of death and his resentment towards the Soul Society, who created a world that separated life and death. This is a major theme of Yhwach's character which felt vague within the manga, but the anime is doing a fantastic job of hammering this home to us as we begin to understand and appreciate the motives of the Quincy King. Next week, as you know, we will be having a double feature with episode 25 titled The Master and episode 26 titled Black airing at the same time as the finale for Cour 2. The Bleach 1000 Year Blood War Cour 2 finale has just dropped, with episode 25 titled The Master and episode 26 titled Black. Episode 25 rearranged several scenes from the manga with multiple anime exclusive scenes which build upon the 5 chapters worth of manga material that are adapted into the episode. The sequence of events are massively changed around in comparison to the manga, and it's like a totally different version of the 1000 Year Blood War arc. You're honestly going to be so surprised by some of these changes. Episode 25 has several new fight scenes involving Hashward and Uryu as they battle the Zero Division, along with Ichibe, Yhwach, and even Mayuri getting new lines of dialogue, with the episode then concluding with a post-credit scene which features Shunsui and Ukitake. The final episode of Cour 2 also dropped this week, as episode 26 titled Black adapts material from chapters 607 to the halfway mark of chapter 609, as it adapts roughly 2.5 chapters worth of manga material with loads of anime exclusive scenes, including a new fight sequence between Senjumaru, who single-handedly takes on the Shoot Starful. Now, episode 26 has been a little controversial with some of the last-minute alterations that have been made to it, which had resulted in the original title for this episode A being changed to Black. Because of this, it led to us receiving a 4-minute Shinigami Zukan segment after the outro song. Now, this is similar to the comedic post-credit scenes from the 2004 Bleach anime. This segment featured several comedic moments that were not adapted into previous episodes, as they have been shoehorned into the end of this episode. There is an insane amount of things to cover in this video, so rest assured I'm going to be covering every cut, change and addition that has been made, and as always I'm going to refrain from talking about any scenes that are one-to-one adapted from the manga, as I'm solely going to be focusing on what has been cut, changed and added to the anime. So without further delay, here is my manga versus anime comparison for episode 25 and 26 of Bleach's 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Episode 25 begins by adapting material from chapter 606, where we see Yoriichi's younger brother rushing to find her, as we cut to Urahara with 6 pages worth of material being adapted from chapter 606. Now this involves the Vizards arriving and Hiyori scolding Urahara until Yushiro arrives and is introduced to us, and the scene ends with Hiyori stating that she has always hated how Urahara justifies his actions by stating that they are for the sake of the Serete, as we then cut to the intro song. Following the opening song, the rearrangement of manga material continues as we pick up from where we had left off at the end of last week's episode, with the last 2 pages of chapter 604 being adapted. This is where Ichibe warns Yhwach not to say his name so casually, unless he wants to lose his voice by having his throat crushed. The intense music playing here really gives off such a cinematic feel as we begin the finale of Cour 2 in proper style. It is all just so hype-inducing and I really enjoyed it. We then cut to an anime exclusive scene which you can expect a lot of from now on, since the anime has diverged from the manga slightly, with Yhwach having already confronted Ichibe while the Zero Division members are left behind to confront Uryu and Hashwald. Within the manga version events, Yhwach had only gone on to confront Ichibe after the Shoot Starful were revived and following Nimaya's defeat. Now the anime shows us Nimaya pointing his Zanpakuto towards Hashwald and Uryu, and in an all new line of dialogue he states that it is terrible for their king to have ran away, so he'll just have to settle for killing his successor, as he asks them who is Yhwach's heir. Immediately following Nimaya's new dialogue, we cut to page 6 of chapter 605, with the first 5 pages of the chapter being saved for the post-credit scene of episode 25, but I'll talk more about that a bit later on. The remaining material of chapter 605, featuring the early portions of Ichibe vs Yhwach, are faithfully adapted into the anime with little to no changes. I really love the animation when Ichibe draws his seal behind him as their battle begins. I think that the anime really improved
load upon the manga content here as the epic showdown commences. After Yhwach summons Sankt Bogen and returns from being slapped hundreds of miles away, we end content from chapter 605, and we continue with material from the first 3 pages of chapter 606, where Ichibei states that he is left with no choice but to kill him, as they both draw their weapons and charge towards each other. We then return to anime original content, which features several new lines of dialogue accompanying never before seen fights involving the Zero Division versus Hashward and Uryu, with Nimaya stating that it doesn't make any difference who goes first, as Hashward draws his sword, stating that they were fortunate that they didn't have to fight against his majesty. He then uses his Shrift ability to balance to bestow an equivalent amount of misfortune upon the Zero Division, which results in Kiryo's cage of life crumbling away. This is confirmed with Kiryo rushing up to the top of her cage as she states that she doesn't know what kind of power he has just used, but her cage isn't going to be so easily destroyed. She then infuses her reishi into several small pieces of a tree, which enlarge and reconnect the broken cage back together again. Following this, Cringy appears and summons his White Bone Hell Spring Water, which he fires at Hashward and Uryu as it envelops them. We then see Senjumaru as Uryu appears in front of her after having used Haren Hyaku to evade Cringy's attack. So the stage appears to be set for the all-new fight sequences as Uryu confronts Senjumaru while Hashward battles Cringy. Senjumaru and Uryu begin clashing in a really impressive anime-only fight sequence as they taunt each other while she uses her golden arms to attack him with needles. Now the anime has another amazing addition here as Uryu evades her attacks by reinforcing his hands with Blutveen. Meanwhile, Cringy activates his Zanbakudo Kinpika's Shikai as it begins to blindingly glow, and this was shown to us in chapter 588 originally, when in the manga version of events, Cringy had used his powers against Yhwach. But instead, his abilities are shown here in this anime exclusive fight scene where he fights with Hashward as we begin to see the two of them clash. Now while Kiryo is overseeing the Cage of Life, Nimaya is confronted by Askin, who is revealed to have survived, and this is very similar to the manga as we get content adapted from the end of chapter 601 to 602. Now I was worried that this content would be completely cut from the anime, but thankfully they have chopped and changed things around and managed to squeeze it in with some reworked new scenes which honestly flow together seamlessly in my opinion. So the material from the last 2 pages of chapter 601 is faithfully adapted into the anime as we begin Askin's counterattack against Nimaya. Now this moment does occur immediately after Nimaya takes out Askin in the manga. The anime reworks this later on into the story because of all of the changes and additions that have been made. Now there is a very notable change that has been made with the first page of chapter 602 where we learn about the definition of a lethal dose not being adapted into the anime. Now this manga page explains that a lethal dose is a fatal amount of a given substance that is consumed by an organism, as we are given examples of the fatal doses in milligrams of caffeine, nicotine and wolfsbane per kilogram of body weight, since a lethal dose is relative to the size of the organism. Instead of this exposition dump, the anime just has Askin explain that a shrift is the letter D, the death dealing, as he explains that he can accurately calculate the lethal dose of any substance and he can adjust it at his will. So after Nimaya collapses to the ground, we cut back to anime original content with Uryu versus Senjumaru. Now this new scene reveals several new abilities for Senjumaru. The most notable is when she uses a defensive umbrella to defend against Uryu's Rain of Light attack. We then cut to Cringy's anime only battle against Hashward as he manages to throw away Hashward's sacrifice shield, which allows him to absorb misfortune. Now they both then clash as Cringy is able to deliver a critical blow that seemingly kills Hashward. This was an unbelievable addition that has been made to the anime, and I cannot believe that Cringy was responsible for killing Yhwach's right hand man. These changes are really giving the Zero Division the respect that they deserve, and thankfully this frees up Cringy so that he can now assist Nimaya, which lines up perfectly with the rearranged manga content from chapter 602. So following Cringy's battle, the remainder of chapter 602 is faithfully adapted into the anime, and despite the rearranged material, Cringy manages to pull through with the assist, as Nimaya ultimately defeats Askin. But now, because the manga and the anime have diverged slightly, the end of chapter 602 isn't adapted. This is because it features Nimaya challenging Yhwach, who is still inside the Cage of Life within the manga, so this scene ends up being cut from the anime. We then transition to the finale of the anime exclusive fight between Uryu versus Senjumaru as balls of reishi appear to be spinning on top of an umbrella. Now the reishi breaks up into smaller pieces as it expands out into threads that chase after Uryu like homing missiles. They appear to be moving far too fast for him to evade as he is struck by several several of them. He then ends up being defeated by Senjumaru, and this is a massive departure from the manga, where Senjumaru and Korinji really felt like they had lackluster roles within the story, and the anime has honestly given them a lot of respect by showcasing them defeating Hashwad and Uryu here. Additionally, Nimaya single-handedly defeating the Schutzstaffel was pretty much unchanged from the manga, and these new additions just help to give each of the Zero Division members more importance, and hopefully it's enough to satisfy fan expectations. So Kiryu appears at the end of the anime-only scene stating that the Zero Division have wrapped up their fights, and now it's up to Ichibei to finish off Yhwach. We then cut to material from the middle of chapter 606 as Ichibei and Yhwach clash, with Yhwach commenting on how Ichibei's face appears to be more disturbing after he had declared to kill him. The rest of chapter 606 is faithfully adapted into the episode until the point where Ichibei slaps Yhwach away and asks him how it feels to be smashed into pieces with only half of his power by the leader of the Shinigami, who he loathes so much. Now, the last two panels of the chapter where Yhwach responds to his question are not adapted, as we cut to the mid-card of the episode. Now, the second half of the episode begins by adapting material from chapter 603, which wasn't adapted earlier, as we see Giselle drinking her blood from zombified Bambietta. About 6.5 pages are adapted into the anime, as the anime cuts about 4 pages of material involving Robert, who appears and points his gun at Lil Toto, as he then appears to panic about Yhwach having abandoned them. Now, instead of these scenes involving Robert, we get an all-new anime-exclusive Ashvalin scene that occurs in a totally different order to the manga, as it happens during the early portion of his battle with Ichibei, as opposed to the manga where he had casted Ashvalin while he was still inside Kiryu's cage of life. The anime original scene begins with Ichibei reflecting on their meeting from 1000 years ago, which was revealed at the start of episode 24. He tells Yhwach that 1000 years appears to have been too short of a time for him to reflect on his mistakes, as he states that he will now have eternity to reflect on his actions. As he prepares to attack him, Yhwach casts Ashvalin. He chants several lines as the light of his consecration rains down over the Serete, enveloping several Soldat as well as the surviving Sternritter, as they offer up their power in order to revive the Schutzstaffel, as well as Hashwad and Uryu, who were defeated in the anime exclusive scenes. The new Ashvalin scene reveals new footage of several Shinigami as well as Quincy reacting to the light. Now, Mayuri also gets new lines of dialogue here, where he wonders if the light is absorbing Reishi, as he quickly corrects himself by explaining that it is power that is being absorbed from the souls of the Quincy. We also see an anime exclusive shot of Meninas carrying an injured Candice, as the two of them are also hit by the light of Ashvalin. Now, the scale of the consecration is truly depicted to us, as we see multiple Soldat are sacrificed, as Lil Toto questions just what on earth are they to Yhwach. The manga context mixed together with the new anime scenes really sells the impact of Yhwach's actions and how the Sternritter have been effectively betrayed by their leader, who has just used them to progress to the next stage of his plan. This new Ashvalin footage is shown alongside manga content from the end of chapter 603 and the start of chapter 604, where Lil Toto and Bazby resolve that they are not going to die here. A page from chapter 604 is not adapted into the anime, as it showcases Byakuya reacting to the light, where we see him wondering what the light is that is shooting out from the Serete. Instead, we are shown Shunsui telling Okikiba and Nanao that it isn't the Serete that's in danger, it's the royal palace, as he then asks them if it's okay for him to leave his post. It seems like he has another urgent matter to attend to. With Hashwad, Uryu and the Schutzstaffel revived, we get to see the distinctive shape and style of the wings of each of the Schutzstaffel members. Ichibei goes on to state in an anime original line of dialogue that it is disgusting that Yhwach has resorted to taking the power of his comrades, as Yhwach responds with a line from the end of chapter 603, as he explains that his underlings help one another as comrades, as he tells the Schutzstaffel to come back to life and to move forward. We then cut to material from the middle of chapter 604 with Nimaya asking what is going on. Now, in the manga, Nimaya had been attacked by Lil Barrow immediately after he was revived, but in the anime he appears to be unharmed. Hashwad then begins to explain Ashvalin to him, stating that it is one of His Majesty's powers, as he exclaims that the scales have now been tipped, as he tells the Zero Division to prepare themselves. Now, this is where the episode ends, as we cut to the title card The Master, as the ending song begins to play. Now, make sure that you stick around until after the outro, because we do have a post-credit scene for episode 25. The post-credit scene adapts manga content that wasn't adapted earlier into the episode, as we continue the trend of chopping and changing around material, as the first 4 pages of chapter 605 are adapted here. The post-credit scene
faithfully adapts Shunsui's brief meeting with Ukitake, who reveals to him that the Kamikake ritual has been completed successfully, and it has been done in anticipation of the enemy reaching the royal palace, as Shunsui proceeds to reveal that he is headed off to the Central 46 to deal with another pressing matter, as we then end the second to last episode of Cour 2 on a very suspenseful cliffhanger. Now thankfully we don't have to wait an entire week to find out what happens next, as episode 26 was released alongside episode 25, which means that we are only halfway through with the content for this week's manga vs anime comparison video. Next up we have the final episode of Cour 2 titled Black, so let's continue by discussing how the anime staff handled adapting one of the most highly anticipated fights of Bleach's final arc, as we dive into the remainder of Ichibe's intense battle against Yhwach. Episode 26 begins with an anime original sequence which continues from the end of episode 25 as Yhwach tells the Shoot Starfall that it is time for them to show him their wings. The revival of the fallen Quincy is felt by Ichigo and company as we get visuals of Uryu, Hashwad and the 4 Shoot Starfall members revived with their glowing wings. Yuha tells Ichibe that everything in this world exists for him to take, including the Soul King. This of course is reworked and rearranged dialogue from the start of chapter 607, with a notable addition to the anime being a line of dialogue where Yhwach mentions that even the Soul King is his to take. After he stops the downpour of Reishi from the Ashwalan, he orders the Shoot Starfall to launch their counterattack, as we cut to the title card of the episode Black, which is then followed by the opening song. After the intro, we begin by backtracking slightly and adapting material that wasn't included in episode 25, as content from chapter 604 is adapted, where Nimaya is immediately shot by Lil following his revival. The content from chapter 604 is reworked into the anime, and it fits very seamlessly with all of the changes and additions that have been made. The manga content where Lil explains how the X-axis works, as well as Kurinji and Kiryu attempting to block his attack, are also included from chapter 604. After Nimaya is shot through the chest, we begin an anime exclusive scene where Kurinji uses Kinpika's bright light to distract Lil, while Senjumaru picks up Nimaya and heals him with an all-new technique. So she fills his wounds with what appears to be wool as she stitches him back together using her golden arm extensions. This completely restores Nimaya. This is a massive departure from the manga, because after Nimaya is shot by Lil in chapter 604, we don't really ever see him again, because this was the attack that ended up defeating him. This is then followed by anime exclusive dialogue from Gerard, who comments on Nimaya being healed, as we then see the Zero Division who are ready to fight back, as each of them have new lines of dialogue here, like Kurinji telling the Quincy not to underestimate Squad Zero, as he explains that they are stronger than all of the Gotei 13 combined. Kiryu then creates several branches which transform the landscape surrounding the combatants, as they are engulfed into a ball made up of oversized branches. Now this has been done in order to set the stage for several anime exclusive battles that further expand upon the Zero Division's role in the story, as Senjumaru battles Gerard, Kiryu battles Pernida, Kurinji battles Askin, and lastly Nimaya vs Lil is expanded in the anime. Honestly, I really loved these new fight sequences. They were brief and did enough to show how the Zero Division had the upper hand on each of the revived Shoot Starfall members, which was a welcomed change from the manga, because originally in the manga, after they were revived, the Zero Division was assumed to have been defeated, with them getting pretty much off-screened, as the attention then turns back to Yhwach vs Ichibe instead. Now these several different anime exclusive fight sequences here involve Senjumaru swiftly taking down Gerard as she uses her arms to tie him down. Kiryu vs Pernida has her creating branches which Pernida avoids, but he eventually appears to be crushed by a large branch. Kurinji is then seen to use his red hot spring water on Askin as he chases him down with the shining Shikai blade of Kinpika. Askin actually puts up a bit of a fight against him until he is seen running away from him. Now the last fight of this anime only sequence involves Lil firing shots towards Nimaya, who evades them before he appears in front of him, as he then lunges in for an attack. We then cut to material from the midpoint of chapter 607 as the anime doesn't adapt a brief clash where Yhwach fires spikes of reishi towards Ichibe, where he intercepts them with his hands. Instead, the anime adapts right after this moment where Ichibe explains to Yhwach his generous reasoning behind why he had only cut his power in half. The rest of chapter 607 is adapted, with the final material from chapter 607 being Ichibe releasing his Shikai Ichimonji. Content is then adapted from the start of chapter 608 with a panel of internal monologue from Yhwach being omitted from the anime. Now this is where Yhwach comments on how Ichibe had transformed his brush flesh into a blade, and how he doesn't sense any spiritual pressure from it. The anime conveys this instead visually without all of this monologuing, which I think still works the same. So this scene in particular adapts content all the way up until the midpoint of chapter 608, where Ichibei explains how his Shikai works and how he is able to paint anything black and then remove its power. Following this, we cut to more anime exclusive material, which reveals how each of the Zero Division members gets bodied by the respective Schutzstaffel member that they are battling. Senjumaru is the first one shown to be taken out as she fails to pierce Gerard's heart with a needle. Pernida is then revealed to be able to warp and get rid of Kiryo's branches as she struggles to create more, as she eventually then runs out of reishi and returns to her slimmer form. And this is where Pernida takes the upper hand against her. Kirinji also seems to have been defeated when he underestimates Askin, who appears behind him delivering a decisive final blow. Lastly, Nimaya is then taken out by Lil when he tries to attack him while Yuhobak is behind him and in the line of sight of Lil's gun. However, Lil fires anyway and lands a critical blow as he reminds Nimaya that his X-axis ability penetrates whatever is in between him and his target. Since his target was Nimaya, the attack must have probably stopped there. With the situation looking really bad for the Zero Division, Kiryo's massive ball of branches disintegrates, as we then cut back to Ichibei vs Yuhobak. The remainder of chapter 608 begins to be adapted as Yuhobak uses his ability Sanct Altar as he attempts to rob Ichibei of his power. After he removes the color black from Ichibei, the anime has a very cool visual of Ichibei's hair in a grey color. Now in the manga, this was shown to us via a very small manga panel, which I think that the anime helps us to better visualize and to understand through this one shot of Ichibei. Following this, the anime adds an all new scene here where Yuhobak says to Ichibei that his power has become his now, as he launches an attack composed of blue flames towards him. We are then shown the defeated Zero Division as we then fade into black, which is apparently the midpoint of this episode, as we didn't really end up getting a mid-card for episode 26. Following the midpoint, we return to more anime original material as the second half of episode 26 features one of the most important anime exclusive editions in the entire anime, and it honestly is my highlight for this episode. So we begin with the Schutzstaffel towering over the fallen Squad Zero as Gerard mocks their previous statement of claiming to be more powerful than the entire Gotei 13. Now for a second there, this scene feels like a really self-aware jab by Kubo himself, because this is something that fans have brought up via this statement as a means of mocking Kubo's choice to have overhyped the Zero Division, only for the Gotei 13 to end up later being the ones who defeat the Schutzstaffel. So we continue with the anime exclusive content, with Nimaya standing up and warning Gerard not to be too hasty as he reveals that Squad Zero has yet to even use the power of a single division of the Gotei 13. He then yells at his fallen comrades to rise, reminding them that as the protectors of the Soul King, they cannot fall to just mere Quincy. After they all rise, he points his Zanpakuto at Senjumaru, telling her that she's going to be the one to kill them. The tone of Nimaya's speech heavily suggests that this is something that they've done before, like it's some sort of a routine procedure. She then goes on to ask him if he is sure of his choice, as Kiryo responds, stating that her 1,000 arms will be more than enough to deal with their 6 opponents. Kirinji even adds to this by telling Senjumaru that she should be careful and not to go overboard, to which Senjumaru states that it's a no-brainer. This obviously hints at her about to reveal an absolutely insane ability, which foreshadows that she doesn't even need to go all out because she is that powerful, and even a small fraction of the power that she's about to unleash will be more than enough to deal with her opponents. So the Quincy here watch on in confusion, which is a sentiment that is also shared by both anime-only viewers and manga readers, because this is something that was never shown within the manga. Senjumaru steps forward, walking ahead of the group, who now appear to be in a formation, as Nimaya exclaims that he is about to show them how Squad Zero gets serious. Nimaya, Kirinji and Kiryo kneel down, and they end up cutting themselves as they offer up their lives as a sacrifice in order to empower Senjumaru. The actions of the 3 Squad Zero members is confirmed by Uryu, who comments that they have just ended their own lives. Now this is a very bloody and gruesome scene, and it's disturbing that this is a power that the Zero Division have had up their sleeves the entire time. The anime original scene continues as we are shown a shrine with 4 small candles in front of 4 small symbols, and a massive symbol combining all of the 4 small symbols at the back. Now 3 of the lit candles are extinguished, which represent the 3 Squad Zero members who just gave up their lives. The larger projection at the back is left with 1 symbol that presumably represents Senjumaru, as only 1 small candle remains lit up. Following this, we cut back to the royal palace as Senjumaru's Reiatsu erupts, illuminating the area, her as Senjumaru walks towards Gerard, who asks her what she hopes to achieve by herself, considering that she stood no chance against them when there was 4 of them fighting. Senjumaru then, in one of the most important anime exclusive lines of dialogue in the entire episode, explains that if the Zero Division were to utilize even the slightest amount of their power, then it would cause the 3 realms to tremble. So the 4 members of the Zero Division had linked their lives to one another in order to seal away the true power of their Zanpakuto. So then by sacrificing themselves, Kurinji, Nimaya and Kiryu have allowed Senjumaru to activate her Bankai, or in other words, her true power. This explanation given by Senjumaru has insane implications, because it means that any of the Zero Division members are powerful enough to have been able to single-handedly defeat all of the Schutzstaffel. This is given the condition that they are able to utilize their true power. Now this really justifies Senjumaru's insults that she directed towards Yhwach in an earlier episode, where she comments on how he must have taken some confidence pills for him to think that he can just rock up at the royal palace just because he ended up killing head captain Yamamoto. Prior to this anime exclusive scene, it was hard to even take Senjumaru's taunt seriously, because nothing within the manga had revealed or suggested to us that she had more power that was anywhere near to that of Yamamoto. Now this anime only edition finally convincingly explains how the Zero Division are in fact more powerful than all of the Gotei 13 combined. Then the 5-minute long new anime only scene continues with Senjumaru activating her Bankai, which does in fact result in the 3 realms trembling, and this confirms his statement from earlier, as we are shown even Isshin and Ryuken reacting in the world of the living to her Bankai activation. Senjumaru's Bankai reveal is accompanied by some amazing CGI shots of a giant fabric weaving loom which is being built around her. Her Bankai is revealed to have the power to weave yarn into a cloth that can perfectly counter the ability of her target. The whole sequence that then unfolds excellently foreshadows how each of the Schutzstaffel members are defeated later on in the manga. Firstly, she defeats Lil by using the power of his own attacks reflected back at him, as this is represented by an 8-sided mirror that surrounds him. Now this of course draws a parallel to how he is later defeated by Nanao's divine 8-mirror sword. Askin ends up being defeated by 3 pieces of golden armor which represent his battle against the 3 opponents Yoriichi, Urahara and Grimmjow. Pranida is shown to be defeated by Senjumaru when he is swallowed up into an infinite vortex of sand, and this is similar to how he is later defeated by being overwhelmed by the uncontrollable multiplication of Nemu's cells after he consumes her. Gerard is defeated by having his limbs held in place before being frozen alive, and this of course foreshadows his battle against Kinpachi, Hitsugaya and Byakuya. Hashward then appears to have been defeated by a massive blast of flames which appear to reduce him down to ashes. Now this interestingly foreshadows his battle against Vaz B. Lastly, Uryu is beaten by a Quincy cross which appears to drain him of his energy as well as his life. Now this foreshadows how he will inevitably have his life stolen by Yhwach if he continues down the path that he is on. Senjumaru's Bankai is riddled with so much symbolism and deeper meaning that it definitely deserves a dedicated video of its own in order to break down this newly revealed incredible power. After having effortlessly defeated her 6 opponents, she proceeds to embroider them onto newly made textile cloths, as this serves as a permanent mark of their defeat. So before I start to go on more of a tangent about how amazing her Bankai is, let's move on to the end of the episode. So we cut to altered manga material adapting the remainder of chapter 608 as we follow up from the blue-flamed attack that Yhwach had fired at Ichibei, as Yuha begins to walk away thinking that the fight is over, only to be surprised when he turns around to see an unfazed Ichibei standing there menacingly, as he then begins to explain how he has power over the color black, which is adapted from the manga really well. Yhwach is then struck by Ichimonji, which adapts material from the very end of chapter 608. Immediately following this, we cut to content adapted from the first half of chapter 609, and it's very faithfully adapted into the end of episode 26, as Ichibei's Bankai Shirafude Ichimonji is used to give Yhwach the name Black Ant. Following this, Yhwach is sent crashing into the air below him, and he is then crushed in mid-air by 2 giant hands that seemingly appear to have defeated him, as Ichibei then refers to Yuha as the king of bugs as he turns around to leave, and then we cut to the credits of episode 26 as Kotu appears to have wrapped up on the 11th page of chapter 609. Following the end credits, we are given a blast from the past as the last 4 minutes of the episode are taken up by an old segment that used to appear at the end of the episodes for the 2004 Bleach anime, and it's called Shinigami Zukan, or the Shinigami Illustrated Guide, which is hosted by the favorite mascot that we love to hate, the King of New York, Kon. Episode 26 fans had presumed would wrap up at chapter 611, which seemed like a reasonable point to end cour 2 on, with Ichibei vs Yhwach concluding at a massive cliffhanger of the Soul King being killed being the most impactful cliffhanger that we believed that cour 2 would wrap things up on. However, because of production issues or for whatever reason, we ended up getting this segment which serves to adapt 2 comedic scenes which were not adapted into earlier episodes. Now, I do say adapted loosely because they have limited animation and they are more like voice acted slideshows with backgrounds and character avatars on screen which represent the characters. So the first comedic scene is taken from chapter 516 when Mayuri is explaining to Ichigo that a broken Bankai cannot be repaired. They are then interrupted by Kon, who appears in a muscular form before he shrinks back down to size as Mayuri directs Ichigo's attention to the Zero Division who have just landed in the Serite. The second comedic scene is adapted from chapter 545 and it's of Rukia and Renji recalling their time spent at Senjumaru's palace. Similar to the first comedic scene, the lines are taken straight out of the manga and it faithfully adapts the comedic moments where she forces Renji to remove his clothes. Kon then funnily wraps up the segment by arguing that they need to show more of this kind of stuff as he complains that the tension between the Shinigami and the Quincy is way too serious in tone, which funnily enough is the reason why this comedic stuff is being cut in order to maintain tonal consistency. Now, while it wasn't the most ideal situation to have these comedic scenes included instead of having Yhwach vs Ichibei wrapped up, I still don't mind because it means that anime staff have more time to animate the final portion of their fight. The Shinigami Zukan was definitely a nostalgic trip down memory lane because I used to love waiting for the end of the episodes to watch these funny segments in my teenage years. Well, that brings us to the end of the second part of Bleach's 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. Following the airing of episode 25 and 26, we had an all-new trailer drop for cour 3, as well as this really cool blue-colored key visual of Uryu which teases that cour 3 is titled The Conflict and it will begin streaming sometime in 2024. Now, I have made a separate video which breaks down the new trailer that we received, so definitely go and check out that video as I speak about all of the new material that we can hope to see in the next part of Bleach, which includes new scenes featuring Ukitake, Aizen possibly returning to the story, as well as the chance that we may get an all-new fight between Ichigo and Uryu. Cour 2 had started by adapting material from chapter 543 and taking us all the way to the midpoint of chapter 609, which covers a solid 67.5 chapters worth of material, which is slightly more than the 62 chapters worth of content that was adapted into cour 1. Now, unlike cour 2, we don't really have any idea as to what month in 2024 the next part of Bleach will begin airing in, but I do hope that they have more time than 6 months to deliver the next batch of 13 episodes. I have really enjoyed keeping all of you up to date with these reviews and manga versus anime comparison videos, so if you have enjoyed the content then definitely subscribe to the channel and stick around for more regular Bleach content. Leave your suggestions in the comments for what videos you would like to see uploaded to fill the space between cour 2 and 3. I look forward to reading all of your thoughts on the finale of the second part of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime, and lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this video and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.